Fuck. I tried to go closed. Okay, that's fine. The pistol. Yeah, the pistol's fine. I forget which one I go. I think I go with the cleaver. I usually go with the cane. I usually don't go with the cleaver. Is this too loud? The PS4. I'll turn it down a little. What was I gonna say? I forget. Ah. Man, I haven't played Bloodborne in forever. No, I'm not playing Halo. Oh, I can't do anything just yet. Don't I have to get the bitch? No? Okay. I haven't played this in forever. I'm excited though. It's like this is the one Souls game. This is the one Souls game that I don't have as much experience with. I played the Dark Souls game. Oh, actually, I'm probably more familiar with this than I am with Dark Souls 2. I'm gonna have the caller. I'm gonna have him call in shortly. What was I gonna say? Oh, so I kind of put the I told some people this, but I put the whatchamacallit? I put the Forced Diversity video on sort of like I shelved it for just a little bit, just because I've tried to like I don't know, I've tried to like do it, but it's so like the people who talk about Forced Diversity are like they're so I don't know. They're very bad at staying on point. Like they'll open up with it, they'll start off good, and then they'll just go off into like nutso tangents about shit, about like feminism and so I'm trying my best to like that's how I shoot, right? Yeah. So I've been trying my best to like put it all together, and it's been kind of hard. So I'm actually finishing up. A while back I had actually wrote like my volume okay? Yeah, I think it's fine. A while back, I had actually wrote 10,000 words on... So, it's so weird. So, for those of you who are fans of The Wire, there is no... So, like, for those of you who are fans of The Wire, you know that Season 5 is kind of the black sheep of the series. However, there's actually no essay on YouTube really exploring why. And so I actually want to make that as my next big project. The script is done. I just have to find a time to record it. I don't know when I'll be able to. Hopefully this week. If not, definitely the weekend. And I really want to get that out. Someone asked about the crafted videos. I still got to get those. Those are still coming along. This Wire video has been in the works for a while, though. It's going to take a lot of editing, though, so it might take a while. Well, I'm good and Wire good. My man. Yeah, it's amazing. There's a lot of people who I tried to find like someone being like hey, here's why season 5 of The Wire is known as like the black sheep of the series, and there's nothing on YouTube. So that's what I want to make. It's like right now it's at like it's like at 11,000 words. So it's probably going to be around an hour, maybe longer. So that'll be fun. That's what I really want to get that one out, because I feel like that's what the platform's really missing that, and I feel like I feel like it'll probably do pretty good, perform pretty well. Dude, relax. Oh, one hit, cool. Isn't the saw cleaver better? Isn't this the better weapon to start with? I usually go with the axe. Okay, hang on, I gotta call him in. Fuck you and your fucking shield. All right, hang on 1 second. Let me. Yeah, Osama. I also really want to do I want to do one on whatchamacallit. I want to do one on seasons and like how seasons are actually like. I think they're really bad for TV shows, because hey, I have a story that should be told over 4 hours. Okay, well, great. You need to stretch it to 8 hours. Or like, hey, I have a miniseries that should be 10 episodes. Okay, we need it 6. Like, I feel like that sort of. I thought it would have been gotten better with streaming over the time, but I guess over time, but it really hasn't, because they usually, even when like they're like online series, they still stick to very certain lengths, like 8 to 10 episodes. Like, what if a series just needs like 3 or 4? It's not like totally uncommon, but it's like, I don't know. Okay, hang on. Where am I? Okay. Philios, let's go. I'm gonna hit you up right now. I'll bring you in and then we'll get talking. I gotta be careful though, because I don't want to get fucked. I don't remember why you opened this door. I don't think it really adds any benefit. Oh, that fucker's coming. Okay, Philios. I'm gonna call you right now. Philios?
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, so the stream audio and this audio aren't synced up, right?
No. So you might just have to talk to me through here, and then, but it'll go through stream synced up.
Okay.
Everyone at home, is the PS4 too loud? Let me know. If so, let me know. I'll turn it down, because I don't really need it on, or the volume, really. I think everyone's good. Yeah, no one said anything, so I think that's good news. Here, can you speak a little bit, or say something to the mic?
Hello.
Okay, perfect. I think that should be perfect level then. All right. What's up, my man? So we had, I didn't actually plan on doing another part of this, but my apologies. Last time we had you wanted to get on, and I just didn't. I didn't realize how late I had gotten. I had to run, so my apologies for that. Because I was like, yeah, man, let's go, and then like 2 seconds later, I was like, actually, no. So sorry about that.
Yeah, you and Mars were going at it.
Yeah, that last guy was a little whoa.
I think it started pretty well, but I think the main issue was he was critiquing the discussion you were having with someone else, and that is where you guys started the discussion after that.
Yeah.
Without any kind of concrete objective to what the discussion was. So
It was just
eventually he became flustered, and
yeah, it was just all over the place. It seemed like he was at some point. It was funny because I actually learned that from Destiny. So Destiny's someone I actually admire a lot. Someone who kind of, you know, and he said, someone asked me, like, how do you know when someone is, and I'm not necessarily ascribing this to him or anyone, but someone had asked him, how do you know when when you sort of think someone's acting in bad faith? And the one thing he said, and I actually thought this was interesting, was when people start being very combative at very menial things. So like if I were talking with someone, I'm like, hey, so we all agree that on average men are taller than women, and their response was like, well, and like, you know, if they it's like, okay, if you're not even gonna sort of like, it's like if we're
fought over,
if we're trying to just kind of like come to some sort of agreement and you're already being combative about like little things like this, it's probably not gonna go. This isn't gonna, but okay, so so just in consideration of the last 2 times, or the last 2 discussions we had with other people, not you. So let's start off by doing this, just to kind of like, because in forced monogamy, whenever I think the big problem I had with the last 2 callers was that it kind of, we didn't really agree on what we were even talking about first, and so it kind of evolved from there. So let's do it like this. Let's start. Oh shit. Let's start by saying, what would you consider as a definition in forced monogamy? And then if you, well, hey, let's start off with that, and then I have a follow-up question just so we can work with some stuff. But so what would you say your definition of enforced monogamy be?
Okay. Sorry, the nerves, because I don't really talk that much in front of a crowd necessarily, even though I'm the one they always put up to talk.
Take your time.
So I'm a bit shaky. I got the spaghetti, you know. Enforced monogamy. the way that I see it, the difference between it's essentially using social enforcement as a method of encouraging uh, monogamy as a value, not necessarily having some kind of social institution in place to, make sure that it happens, so to speak. Because I noticed during the last discussion, it sounded as though when you hear social, you hear like an institution is involved of some such or some sort to enforce the value, so to speak.
Well, not even an institution, like, because like one of the biggest critiques, or sort of like people were upset about me, was like in the video they thought that what I was saying, and admittedly this is like what a lot of like cringy reactionary leftists do when they're critiquing Peterson. They assume, oh, you're saying the government should come in and just make men fuck or make chicks fuck dudes, and it's like, no, that's actually not what he's saying. That seems like a really bad straw man. I actually disagree with him in general, no matter what. But if you're gonna straw man him right out of the gate, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about like people. If already you're being disingenuous about this, then we're not gonna have a good convo. So yeah, I agree. So it's sort of like in terms of, it's not like an institution, but there are forms of social norms, socialization, social factors that encourage monogamy. Okay, so I think we agree on that. So if I could ask you, what would you say currently, or actually maybe I should start with this. Would you say that currently we have enforced monogamy? Are you from the USA?
I'm from Jamaica. I've been to the United States a few times, but I'm here in Jamaica now.
I don't know what the case is in Jamaica, but would you say, I guess, like from your knowledge of, would you say the U.S. currently has enforced monogamy?
I would. Jamaica's more traditional than America for sure, but yes, we have it more than the U.S. I wouldn't say that the U.S. doesn't have it. It's really a geographical thing because obviously there's more traditional places in the U.S. Some places more than others, but I'd say in like cities and suburbs, the more modernized places, that it's definitely not a key value lately, so to speak.
So if we're just going off of, let's just stick with Jamaica then, just to kind of, because if it's more traditional, that actually works better for the purposes. Oh shit. What would you say are like, if I were to ask you like for like 3 examples of how social enforced monogamy exists within, say, Jamaican society, what would 3 of those be?
3 examples of,
or it's kind of like, sort of like just like examples of how it sort of manifests itself, because that's sort of my biggest thing, is that enforced monogamy isn't necessarily bad in and of itself. Like, there's nothing wrong with like I don't think there's anything wrong with promoting monogamy. It's about how it's done. It's all about, because again, if you're saying, hey, monogamy is pretty cool, let's do it, that's fine. But if it gets to the point where you're like, hey, if you don't engage in monogamy, if you do something else, you're a whore. Like, that's so
encouragement,
it really,
not consequence.
It really is all of, that's sort of the thing with it, is that it's all about how it's done, basically, how it is practiced in a certain society. So that's sort of why I've tried to kind of dig that out of some, like the last callers and other people, and so far I've had sort of trouble doing so.
Yeah, I did notice that you seem to have an issue with the idea of social enforcement involving a consequence. Specifically.
It really all depends on how it's done. Oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Okay. 3 examples then.
If you can.
First, I'd like to say is that Jamaica is right under the armpit of America, so we largely have a lot of the same issues. We're becoming more and more Americanized, let's say, and we're losing track of the values, especially in the more modern, like say the millennial and Gen Z generation. But for one thing, a church, for example, is a big thing here. I think we have more churches per square mile than anywhere else. It doesn't help the crime rate, but people are expected to go to church, and it's like a whole set of values, church values, so to speak, where you're expected to, grow up, get a job, get married. I think it's a similar thing in the USA, except
Yes. So
Jamaica's more. Yeah, go ahead.
so in this case, there is a religious aspect of socially enforced. The social enforcement is kind of sort of connected with religion in that sense.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think I
I
think it's the same in the U.S. for at least a good, even
good
it's
portion.
well, we've even talked about this before. Even for people who are non-religious, that foundation still manifests itself in society. So it's kind of hard to dig
100%.
out.
Yeah, you can't separate the two. The Western Christian philosophy is the foundation for the reason why we can talk about the same values is because we have societies built on the same values, which stem from the same religion. So, um,
So if we're using that as sort of like a jumping off point in terms of religion, what are some elements of enforcement that you would find related to that? So, for example,
well,
let's say a girl goes to, or a man or woman is part of a church, and they have a child out of wedlock or something that, or maybe they are engaging in an open or polygamous relation. Not polygamous, sorry, because I think that's actually like actual like marrying more than one people, but like a polyamorous.
polyamory.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think part of the biggest part of any kind of enforcement is actually being in a community that you live your life alongside, which is increasingly not present in the USA, especially as people become more disconnected and isolated. In Jamaica, we're a lot more connected with just our neighborhood and the neighborhood church, really, if you go there. However, there's lately been distinction between who's a Christian and who's not. But it's a lifestyle, particularly. When you go to church, you go in 100%. And once you drop out, it's like school. Once you drop out, you really drop out, so to speak. So I forget, what was the question again? Am I answering it?
No, so I'm asking, like, what are some actual, like, examples of enforced monogamy? Like, how would it be practiced in a certain society, whether it's religious or not? Yeah.
Well, like I said, it's largely encouragement or discouragement. You're encouraged to do the right thing. So, like, say, I have a daughter. Well, here in Jamaica, we still beat our kids' ass, so there's that too. If I have a daughter and they start a relationship, let's say in high school, one of the things is even in schools, we would actively try and teach them that they shouldn't be having sex before marriage and such and such, abstinence and at least at the very least having sex in a smart as possible way.
So yeah, well, I think this is like sort of like where this is a good example. I am all for saying, hey, sex is there are certain risks to it. You should be careful. You should obviously use protection. You should understand the risks, STIs, pregnancy,
Yeah.
etc., etc. However, in my view, that really isn't enforcement because the point I'm making is that like, hey, we're just doing this because like we know kids are going to have sex, like teens and stuff. So we have to make sure they know they don't make dumb decisions or like hurt themselves. So we want to make sure they're educated. However, that is different than it seems. Sort of like shaming. So like, do I think 2 15-year-olds should have sex? No. If they do, should they be shamed for it or meant to feel guilty about it? I don't see that's
I
where
don't think so.
Yeah, well, that's sort of like the issue with like sort of like religion is that, or like I shouldn't say the issue with it, but like the weird thing that kind of comes with religion is that it kind of seems to at least fall into elements of slut shaming. It isn't just about like
manifests that eventually.
Yeah, it isn't so much as just like, hey, just be careful, be safe. It's more, if you do this, we are going to look down on you for doing this, and that becomes, but then it becomes, then there are certain circumstances where like if that's like a parent and a child, like I to some extent I can understand that, like parents sees like their child is doing something reckless or not, whatever. I can see like, yeah, the parent might feel disappointed or, you know, whatever.
Huh. We get our ass beat for that here. So.
Well, yeah, well, I don't think that's a good idea in general, but outside of that, when we're talking about grown adults, so for example,
that's
like
a different story.
yeah, so but that's sort of what we're talking about, at least in the U.S. Like if we're talking about say like the incel problem, I really don't think it is as related to, you know, non-monogamy as a lot of people say. I actually think it's because if you actually like look at rates of non-monogamy, they're still pretty low, even as time has gone on and like institutions like marriage have sort of broken up. It's not like everyone's out like in like like there's like, it's not like we have like hundreds of millions of people in like open relationships and, you know, polygamous marriages and stuff. It's like for the most part, most people stay, you know, like one partner or whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean they get married, but
yeah, part of the point is to try and prevent that, which is why the concern arises when we start to see it happening. The concern is that it's going to be regularized and things will eventually turn out that way.
Well, so here's my question is this: so let's say if that did end up happening, where people became like most people entered into open relationships or polygamous relationships. Again, I don't think it would ever be most, no matter what. But let's say it did.
I don't think so either.
What would be the consequence of that?
Well, it really doesn't bode well for children, which is normally the main concern. When adults are doing things individually and they're the only ones that pay for the consequences, that normally isn't such a big issue. The larger issue is that the children are born and that we know that a stable two-parent relationship is very good for the mental development of children, especially when it comes down to aggression and impulse control. So if you want more, like, say, Karens, for example, more... I guess Karens are a different thing because they're more like spoiled people, but what's the word? Just more hedonism and more materialism in general, as people try and ignore virtue, the virtues that they lacked growing up because they didn't have. And not to say that being a part of a two-parent family immediately means that you're going to develop virtue, because you have parents who just aren't really acknowledging how to raise their children properly.
It increases the likelihood.
It increases the likelihood by far.
So
definitely.
So I guess my contentions with that would be it's when we're talking about like the benefits of having two-parent households, I think this kind of like gets off track, because one of the biggest thing about having the benefits of two-parent households is that most either have is simply that you're working with more resources. If children grow up with two parents, they either have two incomes coming in, or one parent stays home and the other parent works. A single parent couldn't do that or they could do that. They could work and then they could like, pay like a sitter or like daycare or something. However, with like the exorbitant cost of childcare as it is today, at least in the U.S., it still is it's sort of cutting a family's legs off. And then if you extrapolate that into, hey, if you grow up with a lot less income, you're probably going to have to live in certain areas that are in general have less income, and it's sort of my contention is that I really don't see any strong evidence for this sort of like the nuclear family itself being like, obviously it is good to have a like a model of a healthy relationship, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be like a married couple. Like again, like there could be an open relationship couples are monogamous, they just have sex with other people. So in that case, so for example, what would happen if, say, like two parents didn't get married, they had a child out of wedlock, and they had an open marriage where they were monogamous, like they committed to each other, but they just had sex with other people occasionally?
I think it depends on how they go about it. If you're in an open relationship and you're having sex with other people and those people are around your children, you're running a serious risk that I honestly wouldn't. If you're going out to have sex with other people, but the sanctity of the home is maintained, let's say, I think that would be more acceptable. But as we know, oftentimes that isn't the case.
What do you mean it's not the? What
That
do you
is
mean it's not the case?
that people won't look at it that way. They won't think, hey, I probably shouldn't do this. That oftentimes people invite others into their home. It's like, all right, where else am I going to do it? Come over, call. They have sex. You probably hear them through the door or something. The children are still in the house.
Well, hang on. I think we're kind of making we're kind of jumping. So at least in my opinion, I know a lot of couples in open relationships, or at least in my experience, they often do a system where it's like, hey, if we have a home and like they don't have kids, but like we're not going to do it like in our bed. We'll go over
Oh
the
yeah,
other
I
people's
agree. Yeah,
places.
100%.
So it seems
If it's like that, then
so again, it
that's a different
seems
story.
like it seems like the issue I have is that it's sort of kind of like going back to our original my conversation with people's last time. It seems like it isn't necessarily the non-monogamy. It's like you have to add in other stuff. Like it's not that like, oh, you're in an open relationship. It's that you have an open relationship and then like you bring a bunch of strangers who you're fucking back to your home.
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
yeah, well, of course, I think we can all agree that's probably not a good idea, but that doesn't necessarily have to do with like having a non-monogamous relationship. So it always kind of gets,
yeah.
and same thing with the guy last time where he was like, well, what if they date someone you dislike? What if they date someone who does drugs? Or like, what if they're like, and it's like,
Oh,
it
what
always
if they're
kind of
not
seems
okay
like,
with it?
yeah, it always kind of seems like it goes to a point where you have to, it's like, yeah, we have to preach monogamy, not non-monogamy. But then I ask, okay, so what's wrong with non-monogamy? And then people talk about a bunch of other stuff that doesn't really have to do explicitly with non-monogamy. And that's sort of where it's a little bit weird to me. And it's still kind of, and like, not to say you, but in general, people, I feel like, at least in my experience, it seems like it is more of an issue with just sort of like people's feelings towards it, and they don't know how to express those feelings exactly, so they kind of have to justify it in a way. Like they try to logically justify it. I don't know. Oh shit! Fuck! Okay, good.
Okay. This is where I said I would touch on things like virtue and the lack of virtue in societies today, especially in younger generations, not being accountable, not wanting to take more responsibility, and such like that. Things like that. It's normally a lack of consideration on how you execute things that causes bad circumstances. You probably shouldn't start an open relationship without telling your spouse, for example.
Well,
You know.
well. If you start an open relationship without telling your spouse, you're just cheating.
Well, yeah,
not,
but
yeah.
That's what a lot of people are calling it. Like, I'm in an open
Well, hang
relationship,
on.
but my spouse doesn't know.
I don't think that's true. I think that's a bit of a straw man. The people are just like, I think those people know that they're. I think those people know that they're cheating. They might be trying to justify it to themselves.
Oh,
but like
definitely.
But that's different than like an actual open relationship. Real quick though, I want to touch upon something because I thought it was interesting. When you said virtue and taking on responsibility, because Peterson, this is actually a big thing of Peterson's shtick, about like accepting responsibility and whatnot.
Yeah.
So just to go back, so you think that part of the lowering virtue in, say, the U.S. or just in the world in general has something to do with younger people not wanting to take on certain levels of responsibility?
Okay. I'm trying to figure how I'm going to word it in my head. I think a lot of that has to do with not only. I don't want to ramble or say something that you might think is unrelated. I agree that all of this stems from the lack of virtue as a priority in the society.
So
as for why that's come to be, it's a whole
here,
can of
let's
worms.
just to keep things on track. So how would you define virtue in a society?
I think part of it is self-awareness, knowing what you need and what you don't need, moderation, responsibility, respect for others.
So
It's hard
So
to
just to
define,
so just
really.
to kind of pick your brain a bit, would you consider doing things such as not having children, being in a op- being in an open relationship, having a polyamorous relationship, not having kids and maybe just being single and just fucking around? Would you consider these things elements of
Lack of
non-virtue?
virtue?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so real
Yes.
quick, why?
Okay. Let me
Because for
word it.
example, if you just to go back to your definition, if we're talking about something like, because like, and like, sort of like if we go back to like one of the big things people talk about is like, well, a lot of people aren't having kids nowadays. Well, I think the big part of the reason for that is, or like settling down, is because well, we live in a very uncertain world, like especially with like kids our age, with whether it's student loans or house prices. It's not so much that people just don't want to have kids. It's that they're like, hey, in the world as it currently is today, having kids is like sort of like, it's not, it is a lot of responsibility. And if we aren't able to give them, that security of like of a, what's the word I'm looking for, a secure life, then then maybe the most responsible thing to do is to wait to have children. So in that case,
I'd agree.
So the only thing in that is I would argue that is very virtuous, that people are thinking of themselves, or are thinking of children in the best interest for themselves and for children.
I'd agree up to a point. It's very easy for us men to say, all right, I'm just going to wait, because we can wait straight up until we're 60 years old, really. And at that point, it's still not the best time to have children when you're that old. You're gonna die by the time they're 20. Um, a lot of people word things this way, but it doesn't really seem to matter how stable or how good they actually have it. It only matters how good they have it in context to the people around them, so to speak. So I look at a country like Jamaica, for example. One of your dollars is 150 of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of money that I would work on a minimum wage job is more than 10 times or 11 times, 12 times less than what the typical American will make with the same job. I went to America to work, minimum wage, and I came back and I've been living at least almost a year now on that money just from 4 months of work. People in lower income countries, the world is burning down around them as much as it seems to be burning down around an American person. So in that sense, I think it's a matter of perspective, because they have this perception of what a good life for a child is supposed to be. And then you figure it, oh, they think it means that, oh, you can't buy them an iPad every year. To what extent is wealth the question?
So I think your
here?
view of wealth and sort of like is a little bit skewed. It's not so much how much people make. It's about how much they make versus the cost of living. So for example, if I made 6 figures and I live in maybe some like nowhere town, New Hampshire, I'm probably doing pretty good. If you make 6 figures and live in San Francisco, you might as well be like, I think you can actually apply for like assistance benefits at that point. The point I'm making is that when we're talking about, it's like, oh well, Americans have a lot of money, and so that's actually not really true, because it's about what you can afford. A lot of people don't want to, I imagine, raise a family or raise a child in a studio apartment.
Well, I've been in America a few times, and I've spoken to a lot of them, and I've seen people who make $800 every 2 weeks, working 8 hours. They live in an apartment that they spend at least 1,000, maybe 1,500 a month, and they buy like $300 shoes 1 month, and then they never wear it. I'm saying that there is a lot of money. A lot of the consumer decisions are very wise.
Real quick, do you think someone who makes $800 every 2 weeks, who lives in an apartment having kids, is a smart decision?
it's not the smartest decision.
Yeah,
Definitely, you might need, especially if you're young. If
yeah,
it's if you're young that you're expected to be working a basic job, so you could go to school,
yeah.
and work your way from there.
So my contention is that a lot of people say it's like, well, birth rates in the U.S. are going down, but they aren't in these like less affluent countries. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. Like I think that like if there are people in countries and they're like below the poverty line and they're having children, that's not good, right?
I mean, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of
yeah.
the my contention is that when we're talking about virtue or like wise or smart decisions, what'll end up happening is people will say, "Oh, well, birth rates in the U.S. Are going down, but they aren't going down in these countries." Well, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I think Cheesecake Militia, you put it very well. Um, when you have the privilege to whether or not to choose or have kids, you're less likely to do so unless you can do so comfortably, unless you can give that child a very secure existence. I actually think what is happening is a good thing. Is that, at least in the U.S., we're like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have kids until we can give them a better quality of life. We don't want people starving. We don't want kids going without. And yet it seems like people look at that and they say it's like, oh well, people were having kids in the 50s and declining birth rates, that's a bad thing. Well, I don't actually think it all depends on the context, but I think people
Yeah,
are so
yeah.
stuck in this sort of like very narrow view of like what you're supposed to do in life that they
I
don't
think
really see that.
I think you also give people a lot of credit. Uh,
And what do you
People
mean?
will oftentimes argue virtue, but however, the actual reasons why they don't do things is, well, for one thing, procrastination is a really strong one.
Yeah, but can't you say the same thing? If a couple has a child, they might be saying, "Oh, we're being virtuous, we're taking on responsibility." Well, if those parents are like not making a lot of money and that child's going to be born to a family where they like can barely feed the kid because they don't make enough money,
In America,
yeah, absolutely.
two parents working in the USA not being able to feed a single child.
Yeah, or not necessarily like feeding it, but like not feeding it well, not sending it to a good school, not being able to afford
I
college.
disagree.
Well, I
I
mean,
have to disagree there.
if you actually look at statistics, it's not like it's. I mean, like statistics would disagree with you. I understand that as sort of the perception of a lot of the U.S., but I think the issue is that a lot of people have a very skewed understanding. They think of the U.S. Oh, everyone has a lot of money here. It's like, again, it's not necessarily about how much money you have. It's about how much money you have in relation to the cost of
Relative
living.
to the cost. Yeah.
Precisely. So
Well, my
that's why I
experience
think.
with the U.S. is that I could like use $50 at Walmart and probably be able to eat for a week because I cook and I meal plan and I think forward.
Well, okay, but again, we're not just talking about feeding. We're talking about school. We're talking about car payments. We're talking about clothes. We're talking about not even a house, but maybe an apartment. Sending that kid to college. So again, we're
Hmm.
talking about like a lot of costs.
Well, college is a different thing, but
Yeah,
yeah,
of
I
course.
definitely agree that cost of living in the U.S. is unreasonable. But I also think that to a large degree, it's consumer choices
So
that cause
just
that. It's
real.
one of those things that we have to.
Well, I
Uh,
think it's more. I just want to just sort of establish. It seems like, or if you want to sort of like what's what I'm looking for, sort of rescind this point. It seems like, despite what statistics may say, despite what this says, um, it seems like you're saying that you just don't think, or you just don't feel like you feel like it's more of an issue with people's choices as opposed to actually having struggle raising a child.
Raising a child is always going to be a struggle to a degree.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so
So in that
yeah,
case, what I see is a lot of people saying it's like, look, if we want to, bring a child into this world, we want to make sure we do it in a sense that child will not go wanting. And again, if you actually like, especially like nowadays with like what just happened with COVID, even back in the 2008, um, even back in 2008,
the
after the
crash. Yeah.
crash, a lot of people kind of had this sort of anxiety that the fact that you can do everything right, you can have kids, you can have a house, you can have a great job, it can all be gone tomorrow. So yeah,
Yeah, uncertain. That's called chaos. At least that's what Jordan Peterson calls it. That's chaos. Uncertainty
Yeah, so it seems like my issue with with Peterson, it's or like with sort of like this whole thing is that it seems like there's a dissonance between, hey, you're trying to make the responsible decision, but there's a but not necessarily like the right decision or responsible decision for you. It's like the responsible right decision that we think you should do based on our outlook of what virtue is. Do you agree? Hello?
Sorry, I'm. It's just been so long since I've really spoken.
So here,
You're saying Peterson.
let me try
definitions of what virtue is.
Let me try to like bring it down. The issue I have with a lot of stuff surrounding enforced monogamy is that it seems like it is more as a result of people trying to push their particular view of what virtue is. A single family household, like the nuclear family, mother father, have kids, and like the suburbs. It seems more like it's a reflection of wanting to preserve that, as opposed to actually doing what is best for everyone. They're trying to sort of like not necessarily bend the will of people, but sort of like encourage them, like, hey, this is what we should be doing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the whole idea of social enforcement. Without a unifying value, let's say, there really is no, enforcing it.
Yeah,
so to speak.
But my issue there is that what exactly are we trying? What values are we trying to enforce? If we're trying to enforce, responsibility, making the right choices for our children, for ourselves, then I agree with that. However, that's sort of what I see happening nowadays with like, hey, if I want to be in an open relationship and not have children, it's not responsible for me to have children that I don't want, right? Or I don't want to get married to someone who I don't want to get married to just because that's what
definitely.
I think. Yeah, and that's sort of what happened back in the 50s, which was what led to the sexual revolution, was that people were sort of pushed into this very narrow lifestyle in what you should do. And the issue was that for a lot of people, they kind of started to question, like, well, what if this isn't what I want to do? And then it kind of all blew up into the sexual revolution. So now So now we're sort of in a space where we're trying to reconcile with that and try to find a middle ground. How can we sort of like have a stable society without like sort of ushering men and women into these very specific roles?
Yeah, the goal isn't or wouldn't be to, try and turn back time. The goal isn't to say oppress people as much as that word is overused.
Well, the problem,
nowadays.
The issue is that when people say oppress, we kind of get these images of like, like women like chained and all that stuff. What I mean by oppressed, or maybe not oppressed, but like there's a certain, and it kind of goes back to enforced monogamy, where you can do whatever you want, but if you make certain choices, people in society are going to maybe look down on those for reasons that aren't really related to, that really don't really make sense on a logical level, but more on an emotional level. So, for example, a lot of people probably would raise their eyebrows at like a married couple having an open relationship. I agree with that. I think they definitely would. However, if I were to then ask them, hey, why? If I see two people who are just in a relationship with one another and they just want to have a relationship, what is the issue with that? And again, there'll be people who try to logically defend how they feel, when in reality it's more about it just doesn't feel right.
I think part of it is the gateways that it oftentimes opens up, that potential for further deviation.
Yeah, but that can be said the exact same way with marriage, because like if we look at right now, the marriage rate is like 50%, if not over. So it seems like the issue, and what we've even seen is that children from divorced households is actually really not good for the children. So it seems
it's very not good for single parent households as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what the issue I see is that if we are trying to push this idea of like marriage and like the monogamy and stuff like that, if that isn't what people want to do, if that isn't what people want to um, to put themselves through. But if we're encouraging that and sort of pushing them towards it, that will lead to bad outcomes, as we are seeing with higher divorce rates and whatnot.
Some bad outcomes, yes. I think largely it's a lack of virtue as well for.
So, again, I don't mean to
the higher
stop you
divorce
again,
rate itself.
but so when we're saying the higher divorce rate and you say lack of virtue, so what lack of virtue in this case?
I think part of it is just the entire marriage system right now is a little bit screwy. I think we go in with expectations on what a marriage should be like, and not with some very basic things. Like, you marry someone, you don't actually know who they are. You marry someone for money. You marry someone for a visa. You marry someone and you have kids, and then maybe in the first place you didn't really want to do it.
Yeah.
You're not friends with your spouse, for one thing, and that's already gonna go up in flames. You don't have the same values. You don't even know yourself. You're not even mature enough to look at another person and say that, hey, I know me and you know you, and we get along really well.
But doesn't that sort of go against the idea of enforced monogamy? Because if people want to be in a, because like I actually don't think you need to like actually have enforced monogamy to I think people will just sort of like navigate, be attracted to that no matter what. However,
I think
if we set up a system where it's like people that is encouraging that is like really like, hey, you want to get married, you want to have kids, and that's not really it. And that's not what people want to do. Because again,
you hear enforced monogamy, you see the word enforce, but it's really encouragement is the goal.
Yeah,
at least it should be.
Yeah, but right now we're in a system where we are encouraging monogamy or encouraging marriage, and the divorce rates are 50%. So what does that tell you about the utility of it?
The utility of enforcement? Well, I'm not saying that you should just go ahead. All right. The first thing we need to do is to understand the current state of the people. Right now, especially young people, let's say lacking that sense of responsibility, or wanting to, or at least being encouraged to, especially via media sources, to go out and live more hedonistic, or let's say lives of excess, and that you're supposed to only settle down once you reach 30 years old, and that's even social enforcement in itself, that when you're in your 30s that you're supposed to be, at the very least it's odd to see you at the club, and you're more expected to be married by then.
Yeah, so real quick, just to stop on that, I think that is a terrible function of enforced monogamy. The way you kind of have like because like people look at like, oh, if you're 30 and you don't have a relationship, or you're not married, people will look at you sort of weirdly, right? They'll sort of like think something's like not good with you, right? I think that's safe to say. Yeah. Okay, so that's not good, because I don't think that someone who is like 30 years old and they haven't met someone who they love and want to settle down with, I don't think they should be looked at oddly for not just settling for someone they don't actually like or want to settle down with, right?
I'd agree up to a point. At face value, it seems that way, but I think a lack of expectations that would normally come with a community are what helps prevent these things from happening in the first place. I'm not saying that you have to just push yourself into a relationship because everybody's expecting you to. I'm saying that to a degree, you already should have learned these things growing up by the time you reach 30.
But why should you? Why is that? Why do you have to learn them that way? Like,
that starts to dip into like individualism versus collectivism, and the benefits and
my point is, like you mentioned, like a lifestyle of hedonism. I don't really like the word hedonism. It kind of, I think, has sort of a negative connotation. I think it's just more, it's like, hey, it's your life, you can do what you want to do, right? And it's, if you want to take
As
Okay, go
so
ahead.
long as the consequences of your actions don't extend to the people around you or the society, that is true. But
Yeah,
that
so that's sort
oftentimes
of
is not the case.
so that's sort of what we were discussing last time when it comes to say, oh shit, that sort of
Casual sex,
happens. Yeah, casual
like
sex or
burgers.
like or open relationships or like non-traditional relationships. How does that affect people outside of this?
Okay, so this is probably the most, where we can actually get into some objectivity because most of this is subjective, like you said, values and perception of values. Um, how does this affect
Fuck.
other people? Okay, let's say you're that guy that's having lots of casual sex, and you say, and I'm your friend, right? I say, hey man, that's great that you're having sex every single day with a different female, but maybe it's not the best for you, maybe it's not the best for society. How does it affect the society? Okay, so you're busy having casual sex, you're going at it. 3 months later, you hear that a girl was pregnant that you had a one night stand with. That's even if you even hear about it, and that she's going to bring that whole thing to term. Boom, child is born, single parent household, doesn't know the father, and that's if and if you're a person, let's say, that is more inclined to that kind of lifestyle, it's not liable that you're suddenly going to give that up. Even though that can happen, of course, it's not liable that you're going to suddenly give that up to settle down with this lady that you barely know. And so, in that sense, a lack of social enforcement, or at least a lack of responsibility with how you engaged in those hedonistic tendencies, has a consequence where it does affect other people. Because there's, as much as we like to use the phrase casual sex, I think it's an oxymoron. There's really isn't that much that's casual about sex because the consequences aren't even just ours. They're off the next generation. They're off some
Yeah, but
child's entire life.
we're in a time when there is contraception and birth control and things like that are
Definitely,
very
but
widely available.
there's still children being born not knowing their fathers, even with all that. Having
Well,
those things available doesn't make
yeah, but
people more responsible.
that's the case with even when it's not even if like if a man and woman decide to have children together and then that bails, that doesn't whether or not it was casual, that could have happened on the first go. So again,
Well,
we're
at the very
connecting.
least, the commitment was there. The
Yeah, but
intention was to be there.
it meant nothing. That's what I mean, and that kind of goes back
But
to the whole
that's
thing. But that kind of goes back to the whole thing with
but
marriage
that's a
is the
very
fact that
niche example.
no,
So
it's not. Wait, no, it's not because
it
we had
happens, but of course,
again we have a massive divorce rate, right? Like it's very high. So we have all these people who are making this commitment and then it's not working out. So what does that
I don't
tell
think
you?
that that's like I said, the lack of virtues. They weren't really making
Hang
the
on, no,
commitment
hang
then.
on. Yeah, but this is what I mean. But but if people are entering these marriage contracts without wanting to or not really wanting to, why are they doing it?
Part of it
Is
is
it
pressure, I guess.
Yeah, precisely. Oh, perfect. There we go. We're almost on par then. So that is so my issue is that like, hey, if you want to get married, that's awesome. If you want to be in a monogamous relationship, that's awesome. If you don't, don't. But the issue right now is I
Yeah,
think
and
we are in a certain society where certain things are frowned upon or looked down upon or certain things are seen as more virtuous than others without there really being any actual reason for it. It just sort of feels that way due to tradition or shit like that. And then what ends up happening is that a lot of people end up entering into like say like marriages or they have children when they don't want to, and that is what leads to bad outcomes.
well, yes, if you're doing something solely out of the expectation and not because you actually possess the virtue, like say if you sign up for a commitment, like even in traditional sense, like if you swore an oath, and then when the battle arrives, you're nowhere to be seen. Obviously, you're not worth your word. You're worth even less than the guy who didn't sign up in the first place, because you said you were going to make that commitment and then you did not. So, I agree 100%. Uh, as for social enforcement, it's kind of a sad outcome that people are always going to see the social expectation and think that they have to do this at this specific time or as soon as possible with anyone that they can, just so that they can look good. A similar thing happens on social media, virtue signaling and all that, where people are
So
like, all right, this is what's cool to do. I just have to go out and do this just to look good, whether or not I'm actually doing anything.
So in that case, would you agree that socially enforced monogamy, trying to push people towards monogamy, isn't, or at least certain forms of it are not good, right?
I think pushing isn't good. I think encouraging is good. Which is why I made the distinction between enforcement and encouragement, like
well, that's
the wording.
But that's exactly. I mean, this is kind of very. I don't mean to say like you, but it's very slippery language, because it's. And I don't mean to say like you're being disingenuous, but like that's very slippery for me, because it's kind of like, oh, I'm not.
It was an issue in the last call as well.
Yeah, I'm not pressuring. I'm just encouraging it. It's like, okay, but now we have to discuss. What does that mean?
It really comes down to what is the solution really?
What is the solution?
What is the solution? Like, what options do we have?
Well, what is the solution to what? What is the problem?
What do we encourage? What do we discourage? I think the best thing to encourage is to, if you're going to make a decision like that, to be responsible about it, because it's really the consequence of the actions that end up causing an issue. Not to say that there isn't consequences, even if, let's say, you say that you don't want a family, you don't want a children, you don't want to settle down, and you're a woman, let's say, and you're focusing on your career, and it's sad, it happens very often. You reach 35, you reach 40, and you're like, okay, I'm going to settle down now. And sadly, you're out of time to actually do these things, to have like a family or to settle down officially. People are starting to try and freeze eggs, cryostasis their eggs in the USA, and sometimes it fails. And they say, if only if I did this when I had the chance. That's why I said part of it is procrastination a lot of the time.
Well, hang on. But now we're kind of in a misnomer, because like now we're talking about, well, if I had done that, it was procrastination. It's not really procrastination.
It's consequences, what I'm saying.
Well, no, not necessarily, because in this situation, this is sort of what happened in the 50s. What was happening was that all these women were sort of in a position where like they weren't able to like actually make a living themselves, and the fault in that was that if they entered a marriage with a man, they were kind of reliant on that, because if they end up getting divorced, what is the woman going to do? She can't. She has no recourse. That's sort of the issue that's happening now, is where a lot of women want that be self-sufficient, which is fantastic, because you don't want to be in a marriage where you're like reliant on the other person for income or like your well-being. However, so when you say procrastination, I don't really think that's the best way to frame it, because there are cases where people, it's like, look, I want to have a career as sort of like the backup. I want to do both, but we don't have.
You can do both.
Yeah, but it's a very extremely difficult to do. And what I'm saying is that on average, that's going to be very difficult for most people to do.
Less difficult in a monogamous relationship, because you have another person to rely on.
Yeah, but what if you don't find someone who you want to be in a monogamous relationship with? Should you just settle for someone you don't want to be with?
I mean, at that point, that's
yeah,
but you wouldn't want to be in a relationship with someone you don't want to be in a relationship with. But if your goal solely is not the relationship but the family, then maybe you could find somebody with a similar view and say, okay, we're going to have a family. We aren't even in a relationship, so to speak, but I want a family, you want a family, and we're both working, and we both want to raise strong children. It all depends on the relationship, on the context, really.
But in that case, what happens is that, like, hey, and this actually happens a lot, where women kind of get to that breaking point where they're like, and they're like they're 30 or whatever, and they want to have kids or a family, and so they might marry someone who kind of fits the bill, but isn't really someone they feel strongly about or may not even be compatible with. However, what ends up happening in that case is that then they stay together and they have kids, and then 10 years down the line, they fucking hate each other because they were never really good with each other to sort of to be with, and then that's what leads to so many divorce rates.
Well, that's just bad decision making.
Wait, so hang on, whoa, hang on. So like this is getting confusing now. So if a woman wants to have a family and a career, if she decides to do the career and then down the line she can't have the family because it's too late or she can't find someone, that is a bad decision because she procrastinated. If a woman decides she wants a family and a career and decides like, well, in order to do this, I'm going to need a monogamous partner, but of course like that puts them on a timetable. It's like you kind of have to find someone, right? And so in that case, what they do is they marry someone who maybe they don't like actually feel super strongly about, but they like the person fits the bill, they make money, they're decent enough. But then 10 years down the line, oh, actually, we're not good together, and now we divorce, and our children are left in a single-parent household with parents who hate each other. That's also a bad decision. So in that case, what are women supposed to do once they hit like age like 27, 28, if they weren't able to reconcile everything they had to reconcile?
Actions have consequences, Mr. McAvoy.
Okay. So I don't understand. So you need to like elaborate on this because like I need to. So I just asked you. I think I just asked you.
Based on what you just said.
Real quick. I think I just asked you a pretty straightforward question, and like, so what would the responsible thing for a woman who is like 29 years old to do in that situation?
I'm not a 29-year-old woman. All right. So
no,
normally
this
is where you'd say I'm answering in bad faith. I'm really trying to answer.
I'm saying
right
in
now.
your viewpoint, that woman who is 29 years old, what is the responsible thing for her to do?
It is better to do than to have not done. Because at the very least, if you started something, you can reconcile the obstacles involved with it, right? That is what I would do personally. However, in every endeavor that you choose to go forward with, there's going to be issues involved. You know, maybe you hate your spouse after 10 years. Probably there was a lot you could have done before that 10 years to either make yourself, more satisfied with the relationship that you chose to be in, right?
Well,
so
yeah,
it isn't.
But you could have
if
found
things
someone
end up
who
wrong anyway, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is if in a situation where, like for a lot of women nowadays, where it seems like every choice is a suboptimal choice, what do we do in that case?
I mean, that's kind of just life at that point.
Yeah, but now we have a situation where that is resulting in a lot of societal breakup. So if we're trying to keep our society intact, and it's resulting in people who are miserable or who are, upset at like not fulfilled, what do we do then?
Well, we'd have to start looking at the relationships and start asking ourselves, why are relationships ending? What is it about the people? Do we need more concrete expectation of a relationship? Because that's a big one. Are we being fulfilled in the relationship before we get married? Why are we getting married? It's life is a consequential game, right? Every option you choose has a consequence in it. You just have to understand that, is this the consequence that you want to live with, or that you're willing to?
But my question is, how do we form a society where people are able to make choices that have less severe consequences for them, for children, for whatever?
Come again?
So what I'm trying to say is like, how do we arrange society where these, because you are right, there's always consequences, but my question is, how do we form a society where people are able to feel fulfilled, feel this way, with the least amount of these consequences? Because right now what's happening, at least in the US, is like we have a lot of like people having children out of wedlock. We have a lot of people in, getting married, maybe they don't want to, and then getting divorced down the line. So it, at least to me, or at least in that sense, when it comes to say, the divorce rate being so high in particular, is that, well, maybe if we sort of like back that up, if we stop this social expectation where like, hey, you need to have kids, or hey, you need to be married by 30, that would, if we just kind of let people do, it's like, hey, do what's right for you without any sort of societal pressure, then that would be good for anyone. But that seems
it sounds like you're steering towards like hyper individualism at that point.
Well, not necessarily, but just not really in terms of individual, but just more
no
or less
expectations.
Just
do whatever you want.
Well, when it comes to things that don't affect you. So like, hey, if you want to get married and have a kid, awesome. If you don't and just want to fuck around and just be a bachelor, what's wrong with that?
Well, like I said before, it's the consequences involved with not doing that responsibly.
What? But what do you mean?
Such as having kids out of wedlock because you're just fucking around.
Well, yeah, but again, we live in a. But we're not talking about that. That's a whole other thing. Having children out of
Okay.
wedlock is a whole other thing. We're talking about just non-monogamy, right? Because
All right,
when we're talking about socially enforced monogamy, we're talking about monogamy.
Well, let's look at how people used to organize themselves. Not necessarily as what we should be doing, but rather what has been done. People kind of noticed, and that's part of the whole reason why religions rose and fought each other, and some died out and some didn't. People were trying to organize themselves in a way to, let's say, minimize suffering and stabilize society. And
here, real quick, Phileas, real quick. The Young City, just to answer your question, I think this is sort of like the Young City, I think this is a really sort of like naive point. Who is getting married when they don't want to? I don't really know if you understand like psychology. Like, you know, there is a large pressure for a lot of people in at least the U.S. to be married by a certain age. Like there's a certain like social pressure towards that. That's the whole thing we're talking about, socially enforced monogamy. And so if you're, say, a woman who was 29 years old and you don't have any prospects, you're kind of coming up in the time where like, oh shit, I need to get married. I need to, you know, do this. Well, that's the whole thing that we're talking about. We don't want women to feel that way or men to feel that way. They're like, oh, I have to be married. Because in that case, you might want to be married, but you might not want to marry the person you end up marrying, which is not good. Sorry, I just wanted to answer his question because it was kind of the point of me was kind of silly.
Yeah. What was I saying again?
Just to kind of get back on track, because I think we kind of got away from it in this house. So my contention is that when we're talking about socially enforced monogamy, what it seems to me is that almost always it seems to be in the fashion or in the way it is done is in, hey, promoting a very specific relationship dynamic. However, this has the not good consequence of resulting in people feeling pressured to do this, even if it's not what they really want, which down the line results in bad consequences, like with divorce or stuff like that. However, it seems like in your opinion, when it comes to virtue, it's like it kind of what you're saying is just like, well, kind of just make the best of a bad lot, I guess.
I mean, that's all of life, really.
Yeah, but the question I am making is like, okay, so how can we balance society where people are able?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, but what I think the answer definitely isn't is to go back to sort of like, you know, the style in the 50s where we had a lot of institutions and sort of machinations in our society that really enforced, if not required in some cases, like monogamy and marriage and stuff like that. That resulted in a lot of people just not being unhappy, which led to like the big blow up of the sexual revolution. So that is definitely what I don't think we should do.
I definitely don't think that it should be enforced to that degree.
Yeah.
I do think that it is good to have it as an expectation and for it to be encouraged. That has consequences to it should be in the acceptable realm of what is going to be a consequence to the individual versus to the society.
But again, if we have, but that could actually lead to a very bad outcome, because if we encourage and expect people to say get married and have children, women end up say like marrying a man who, you know, she doesn't really like feel that strongly about.
Then she shouldn't have married them.
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying is that then we should try to get rid of the expectation that she should get married, right?
Get married in general? No.
Well, yeah, but again, we live in a current society of like where like if you aren't married by like, I don't know, like 30, people start to look at you.
Having expectations isn't a bad thing.
Well, no, it can be depending on what those expectations are.
It can be, but you know, in general, nowadays, oppression is just
if you're
expectations and standards of any kind.
I feel like we're kind of getting off on a weird. What I'm saying is like if I expect you to have a child by 30, and by age 30 comes and you aren't prepared to raise a child, then it's not responsible for you to have a child. However, if the societal expectation is there, to like, hey, you should have a child, that is going to result inevitably in people having children when they're not ready to, and then you have children being born into homes for parents who may or may not have wanted them, or don't have enough funds or
Well, I
income
don't
to
think
raise
the
them.
expectation should be you should have children when you're not ready. I think the
Yeah.
expectation should be you should be in a position to have children at any given point,
Yeah. Okay.
right? You should set yourself up in that manner.
Okay, so in that case, what I would suggest, would you suggest, at least in the U.S., a much stronger social safety net?
Depends on whether or not it's by the government. You mean social safety net, like welfare
Well, yeah,
and
that
such?
would. Well, yeah, that would be
No,
by the. Wait, oh, hey,
100% no.
wait, how come?
Hard no.
Wait, how come?
No to the moon.
So just real quick, because if we had a stronger social safety net, that would result in more security for people growing up, and that would make them more likely to be.
I think there should be
prepared to
more
have
security
children,
for the children, definitely.
Yeah.
One issue that I've seen arise, especially
What about free
in
health? What about free childcare?
free childcare? What
Yeah.
exactly does that mean? Medicare for children?
No, so you'd have like
100% yes.
No, so you'd have like the government sort of the same way like public schools. You'd have like government paid, tax paid childcare for like children ages like 1 to 5, so their parents can still work while raising their children are taken care of during the day while they're at
Childcare?
work.
Oh, it's kind of like a preschool, right?
Not even not in preschool, but like
kindergarten?
even younger. Because again, kindergarten's 5. Those kids, preschool and kindergarten's 4 or 5 years old. With preschool, I actually think a lot of parents need to pay for that shit. But even when you're thinking about children from like ages like from birth to age 3, if a person has that child, they can't just not. They're not taken care of, so they have to still work to pay for.
Oh,
the
I agree
child.
then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
I think it depends on what you meant by, because when I asked you if you meant welfare, I don't think there should be more of that, because we have a lot of people.
Well, that's sort of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about certain
the well-being of the child.
assistance. Well, we're talking about certain government assistance for people. It depends on how that is. It's government assistance. It's just depending on how that is implemented, the form in which it exists.
I agree, especially at the very least overview of how children are being raised, because a lot of people who are having children are very ignorant of how to actually raise children, because maybe they didn't take care of any growing up, they never had to babysit or anything, and then they go into it and it's
so
awful.
just to kind of go back, so what I would recommend is that in order, if we want to make a society better, if we want to do make people more ready, more responsible, the answer is to not kind of go back to how it was like sort of like in the like more traditional, where it was like, hey, the one parent stays home and the other parent works, and because that can actually lead to a lot of imbalances and a lot of problems. So what I would suggest is like the better our society is at taking care of everybody, the more secure they'll feel, and of course the more they'll probably get married, or the more they'll probably have children.
You said the society, but you mean the government, right?
What?
The society or the government?
No, both. Because society, again, if we're talking about people who feel pressured to do certain things at a certain time when they're not ready, that's not good.
I agree to an extent, like I keep saying. Okay, so the more you remove personal responsibility from the people involved with the decision, it's the more you're going to have consequences of how those people act and behave and perceive life, and what expectations they have, so we rely a whole lot, at least in America. Americans rely a whole lot, or at least they have an expectation of what is their rights, and I know it sounds like a tangent, but I'm trying to it's one of the consequences, and like I said, there's consequences to every decision. If you make things easier for the parent to live, let's say, well, that might not be the best. If you make it easier for them to take care of the child, that's probably for the best.
Yeah, but how are they different though?
All right, let's say the parent, in order to get the benefits, the parent has to at least have a job then. Something like that, I think, is fair, because then they'd be contributing to the taxation, contributing to the society, and not just sitting around waiting for the government to look after their child while they go out and
so
do God knows what.
let's rewind, because I think we should probably like wrap up, because I don't really know if we're
Soon,
gonna
yes.
get anything. So my contention is that elements of enforced monogamy are not good, because inevitably that will lead to people sort of feeling pressured, or sort of, even again, you say encouraged, but I think inevitably if a society encourages one thing and people don't match it, they're going to feel pressured to do it. That's just it. Those two things I don't think exist without one another. Because again, if we can encourage something like, hey, maybe you should do things that are good for you, but if we then respond to people who don't do that with sort of like a what's the word I'm looking for? A skeptical eye, that's not good, because that'll just lead to people who aren't ready or don't want to do that doing it, and then it'll lead to very bad situations down the line. So what I would see is like, hey, if you want to have kids, great. If you don't want to have kids, fine. If you want to get married, great. If you want to be in a monogamous relationship, awesome. If we try to push people in a certain direction, that is either A, going to lead to resentment, as it did, or unhappiness, as it did in the 50s, or it's going to lead to a lot more problems, because there's going to be a societal expectation of people to enter that behavior when they don't really want to, or they don't really feel like they're ready to do, which is only going to lead to bad consequences down the line. It sort of seems like people who preach social enforced monogamy, at least in my eyes, are trying to... So here's the best way I'll put my final point. It seems like a large number of people who sort of like push socially enforced monogamy are trying to control people and control people's behavior, when what we should be doing is allow people to make their own choices and adjust society accordingly.
I kind of have to disagree with that.
Why?
Let's look at the incel issue, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They're making their own choices.
What do you mean?
Is it a good choice?
Wait, what's the incel choice? They can't get laid.
No, that's not just it only. They then go further in. They become, more resentful. They start blaming not only, they stop blaming themselves for why they aren't attracted. They start blaming the women at large. Should we be framing society around them?
But why does that happen, though? Why is it when a lot of guys who aren't successful romantically, they end up turning bitter and resentful? Why does that happen?
I mean, that goes to the Adam and Eve story, becoming self-conscious because of the judgment of women.
Wait, hang on. No. So let's go back for a second. When you have a lot of guys who like are not successful with women, why does that result in them becoming very resentful and angry, and in some cases violent?
Because it says they're not good enough, which is what I'm saying.
Why do they feel that way?
Because they are not good enough.
But what I'm saying is, why do they feel worthless if they can't get laid?
You're about to say that it's because the expectation should be that they should center their values around whether or not they can get laid. But it's much deeper than just sex.
Well, that is a very large part of it. But not even that is the fact that I even spoke about in my male dating video, is that like, we're humans. We want connection, we want value, we want intimacy. And if you're searching for that and can't find it, that's not good. However, this is the perfect way, this is a perfect way to describe this. In that case, the answer is to not try to promote socially enforced monogamy, so most women will fuck these dudes who they don't really want to fuck. The answer is, okay, let's take these guys who are having trouble in the dating marketplace, and how can they improve their place in the dating marketplace?
And you're going to achieve that without encouraging them?
Encouraging, well, again, it depends on what we're encouraging.
Without social enforcement.
And social enforcement to do what, though?
To be more attractive, to let's say, look after yourself, exercise, be more social, be a part of a community, have a job.
But in that case, we're encouraging people to do things that are good, like objectively. Telling someone like, hey, you should brush your teeth. There's no like downside to brushing your teeth, right? However, if we're talking about monogamy, that's a totally different ballgame, because there are plenty of people who don't want that lifestyle. So in that case,
Well, like I said before, it's
so in
not
that
an
case,
issue
we are encouraging them to do something they don't want to do.
Well, like I said before, it's not an issue of whether or not it's monogamy. It's the consequences therein that tend to prop up from that and how it burdens society.
Okay, that last statement, I did not even understand what you just said. So can we?
Okay.
So the point
Remember my example?
So the point I am making is that we should. Well, so like again with the incel example, the point I am making is that if we're trying to fix this issue, the issue is to not try to control people's behavior in sense of like, hey, we should encourage women to be monogamous so they'll fuck dudes who otherwise wouldn't be able to get it in. It would be, hey guys, let's encourage you to improve yourselves to make you more attractive options to women. The latter has a lot of negative consequences. Sorry, the
Both
former
have a lot of negative consequences.
How does the second part have negative? How does encouraging guys to be like, hey guys, here's
Okay,
how to,
okay.
Hang on, real quick, just to sort of like free my question. How does telling a guy, hey man, here's how to dress, here's how to look good, here's how to talk to women, be attractive, find fulfillment in your life, how does that lead to bad consequences?
Okay, so the main one is that attractiveness is subjective, and things that
Agreed.
fall into the realm of the subjective have kind of this 80-20 split, right?
Okay, so
if you raise the general attractiveness of the male population, let's say you raise the baseline, right? Now everybody showers and it wipes their ass. Well, that doesn't really mean much because you're still going to be at the bottom, even if you raise, like, say, the standard.
So this 80-20 thing, I've heard like a lot of like, you know, red pills do it. It's complete bullshit, really. There's like this idea of like, oh, well, 20% of the men are fucking 80% of the women. That's just completely...
I disagree with that. I think it's more of a 50% thing.
Well, no, not even that. But the point I'm making is that if we... So here's the thing.
It's not a bad thing. I'm not disagreeing with it.
Here's the thing. Even in the worst case scenario, things will be better under my... so in what I mean by that is like, even in the worst case scenario of men saying it's like, oh, even if it does lead to
oh yeah, it's still largely...
dude, you really gotta like let me finish your point, man.
I'm just trying to agree.
So what I'm saying is that in the case, even in the worst case scenario of this scenario, even if guys like it, like, you know, do all this stuff and they're still unlucky in love, it still leads to better outcomes because they aren't like, what's the word I'm looking for? It isn't as much them feeling inadequate. They might still feel like, oh, darn, I can't get laid, but they're not going to feel as like inadequate as they do in our current society, where if you're a dude and can't get laid, you're like a piece of fucking shit, and you should just like.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
Right.
So that is.
You said it before. It's like I could agree
so that is the solution to the incel problem. Enforced monogamy most certainly is not, because that depends.
I don't think that's the solution.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what the whole thing was.
It makes things a bit better.
I don't actually think it completely doesn't, because if you look at what's going on now, is we have people being slut shamed for making certain choices, that they make certain choices that really don't have anything to do with other people or negative consequences. Because again, it isn't. I think in your view, it's that all. Basically, it's like every single time. Every single time people like look down upon something, there is a logical reason for it. Oh, the reason people look down on that is because it says something about them, but that really isn't always the case. Again, like I said, if a family doesn't want to have children because they don't think they can afford them, I would say that's a responsible, virtuous thing to do. But then other people will turn around and try to justify it, saying it's like, oh, well, they made bad choices when they were younger.
The choice not to have children?
Yeah. So if I'm like,
okay,
let's say like I'm 32 years old.
Are we only going to base whether or not we have children on financial well-being?
Well, we have to, right? If I am only making,
don't think so.
Well, if I'm only making say like $500 a month at a job and I'm living in an apartment, do you think it's responsible for me to have a kid?
So the poor shouldn't reproduce?
Well, no, it's not the fact that they shouldn't reproduce. It's like, do you think that if you were in a position where you
It's not ideal.
Dude, you really have to just let me finish a point before you say something.
It's because you said it.
No,
You,
hang
you
on,
repeat
dude,
yourself,
listen.
so
No, I'm just trying to get something
presume.
out, and then you can respond, please. This is like trying my patience. So if someone is not making a lot of money at all, let's say they're only making like 20K a year, and they're struggling just to feed themselves, do you think that those people, it would be responsible for them to have a child?
Look, all right. So this is where before you said that it becomes disingenuous when even at the smallest thing, uh, a person seems combative, and I don't want to get to that point. However, the way this conversation has been conducted, you've been repeating the same questions, and whether or not I agree or produce a counterpoint, you actually, just kind of loop back in the same way that you did with Mars before. I agree that it's. All right,
real quick,
because I'd let you.
The point I'm making is that what I would say is if I looked at a family who is not very well off, who can barely manage to take care of themselves, if those people decide, you know what, we don't want to have children because we can't give it a good home, it's not good, and I ask you, is that so would you agree that that is virtuous because the parent is making a decision that is in the best interest of themselves and their potential child?
The best interest of a child that isn't in existence.
Well, of course, if
I would say the best decision would be to try and I'm trying to answer, yeah, fair is fair. Come on.
Well, it's
I
like
did it to you.
What I'm trying to say is that all I am saying is that it seems like, and this kind of goes back to my original point, it really seems like people are trying to push a certain worldview, and every time people bring up a counterpoint, they try to wriggle out of it. So the point I'm making is that in this case, if we live in a society where people are so poor or so like downtrodden that they are so afraid to have children because they can't give that child a decent upbringing, in my view, it would be virtuous to say, well, we only want to have a child to make sure that we can give it a good upbringing. If a family had a child and then raised that child into a home knowing that they couldn't like give it that could barely feed it, could barely feed themselves, could barely afford clothes on its back, I don't think that is a very virtuous choice.
You mean a very non-virtuous choice, or you said you
yeah,
don't
I think
think
that's I think having a child when you can't afford to raise a child is very, very irresponsible. Would you disagree?
Yes, but again, I wouldn't. Okay, this is where Mars got very irritated, right? And this is where I'm starting to get flustered as well, right? I agree that it is irresponsible to have children when you don't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
But however, the situations are far more dynamic than that. Of, like you said, wealth, the perception of wealth, cost of living in an area. You could move, for example. Maybe it's just a lot cheaper to raise a child elsewhere. You could save up money. You could change your spending habits. I agree that it is not responsible to have a child that you can't afford. However, you can't ask poor people just not to reproduce in general. That's
I'm
the
not.
majority of the population.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that they shouldn't reproduce. I'm saying that if we want to try and cut down on these bad things and these outcomes in society, we have to find solutions on how to make them not happen. You are correct that I don't think it's fair to tell someone it's not fair for people who are downtrodden. If they really want to have a family and have kids, that it's not fair to say it's like, hey, you shouldn't reproduce. That's like really bad. So the question would then be, how would we be able to give them the chance or help them to have children in a way that does not lead to those bad outcomes? And the same thing extends to, say, monogamy. We don't want people, if we want people being in monogamous relationships, that's good. Monogamy is good. It leads to good outcomes. But we don't want people entering monogamous relationships when they really don't want to, or if they feel like they're being pressured. So to kind of loop back to everything, is that when we're talking about socially enforced monogamy, having these expectations will inevitably lead to people feeling this pressure whether it's like having children if they don't really want them or like they don't feel like they're ready, getting married to people who they don't really want to get married to. That is my contention. That is what I feel is leading to all these bad outcomes. So my contention would be, instead of trying to make people sort of assign themselves to that worldview, is to find out, like, hey, what do you want? How do you want to live your life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then try to bound society in relation to that. Whereas the idea of enforced monogamy is sort of a regression in my views, where it's trying to make people fit into this very specific template, kind of like back in the 50s, where like, oh, things were going good when things were like this. But the issue is that it wasn't going good, because if it was going good, then we wouldn't have had the huge blow up with the sexual revolution.
We're at the point where I already answered these things a few times. My normal answer is not to disagree with you. My answers are to say that there are consequences to individuals, consequences to society, to actions and the society, and that having a standard or an expectation of persons is not a bad thing, because oftentimes a lack of expectations, people will end up doing things that are not beneficial to themselves. People oftentimes don't simply organize themselves into healthy ways, let's say, until, especially, like, you could be, say, obese and miserable for your whole life and, blame the whole world for it. Freedom, it starts to touch on the topic of freedom and how vast and unending and unforgiving the sea of freedom without a guideline on how to swim through it can be. I think we're at the point where we kind of have to say, all right, that's where we are, because I don't really feel like you've taken much from what I said at all. I tried.
In defense of that, I don't really think you've done a sufficient job of really reporting anything.
I don't think you were listening to me then. And I have to agree with
Here,
Mars.
if you wanna,
it doesn't seem like you were listening.
Here, if you want to try to do this. If you can just give me sort of like a final, concise point on the larger point you're trying to make in regard to enforced monogamy.
And I'm gonna need you to, it's gonna be a lot of words. Okay.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Let me get this together in my head. Life, and I have to touch on this because at one point he even asked me, how do we organize people in a way to prevent the consequences of certain things? There is no lack of consequence in any kind of decision or, let's say, choice or value. You could say that the individual is utmost and that the comfort of the individual comes first. However, people purely in their comfort zone tend to never grow, and to encourage somebody to grow is positive to that person's experience. We can either, let's say, embrace the conflicts and obstacles that are presented before us, both to our biology and in the society at large, or we can, this is why I say procrastinate and wait, because we're comfortable right now for years before we actually do anything to further ourselves. Enforced monogamy, touching on the whole topic of social enforcement in general, it's community, really. This is what having a community is, having an expectation on how you conduct yourself and how you live. It is important, even though it doesn't have any immediate consequences, let's say, to the society at large. Over time, there is a degradation, having a lack of expectations for individuals, especially to the individuals themselves. People are lonely, people are miserable, people are pessimistic, they're becoming anti-natalist, they're yearning for totalitarianism because the world doesn't really seem to make much sense. And I'm not trying to say that the answer is to force people to do simply what they don't want to do. I'm saying within the bounds of what you're expected to do, there's an infinite number of ways that you can go about it, right? And I largely agree with you that you don't want the expectations to turn toxic. We don't need to be stoning whores out in the street, right? But I feel as though throughout the discussion, for the most part, you haven't picked up the pieces of what I've been saying. And
So just to carry on that, I think part of the reason you're saying that you're with the picking up the pieces is because you've done a really bad job at doing so. However, the issue there is that, and you kind of, and I think you kind of, I don't think you did this on purpose. I think you're kind of doing this because it's sort of like you're kind of baked into your worldview. When you said, when you said people try to improve themselves or benefit themselves, when you're attaching that to a very particular worldview, which is entering a monogamous relationship and having children, raising a family in a very...
No, I'm not.
Okay. Okay, but you keep saying oh, we should have expectations about people to enter into monogamous relationships.
No, I did not say that.
That's literally the entire...
I did not say that.
That is literally the entire thing we're talking about, though.
Well, that's what we're talking about in general, but when I say that, I said it touches on social expectations in general.
Yeah, but
social enforcement in general, standards in general.
But we're talking about socially enforced monogamy. Why are you going off into just in
that's
general?
Social enforcement.
Yeah, but we're talking
about the same thing.
But we're talking... No, it's not. Because it all depends on what we're socially enforcing. We're talking about socially enforced monogamy. That is what I brought you on to talk about.
And I had said to you that I agree that the expectation shouldn't be to get married when you can't. And then I also said I acknowledge that there are consequences to this, right?
But do you think there should still be an expectation to get married?
Should there be an expectation to get married? Ain't that the question?
I feel like it's a really simple question. Wait, so sorry. You think that there should be a social expectation for people to get married?
Yes. However, that doesn't mean that social enforcement in general always has to be about only getting married. You can
hang on. Stop. We're not talking about social enforcement. We're talking very specifically about socially enforced monogamy. You just said that you think that there should be social expectations for people to enter into monogamous relationships or to get married.
Okay, so I think at that point I should touch on why I think that...
Real quick. I'm just trying to get a yes or no answer for this, because I just need to kind of... Because, again, you kind of went off
into, Personally, I think that we should have social expectation for marriage. Why do I think this? Would you like me to touch on that very quick?
We can, but just real quick. Just because you went on like a massive tangent with something that has nothing to do with...
I'm guessing you didn't pick up anything that I said.
No, because you were talking about social expectations in general. We are talking about socially enforced monogamy. You just said that you think that there should be social expectations for people to enter into monogamous and or marriages. Correct?
Okay, I understand why my script got so upset.
Okay.
Yes, I do think that.
Yes, you do. Okay, so you are for socially enforced monogamy.
You're trying to push me
real quick. Sorry, real quick.
I just asked you. You're refusing my answer.
No, listen to me. I asked you if you believe that there should be social expectations for people to enter into monogamous relationships and or married, right? You said yes.
Yes.
Okay, and then I followed up with that. If social enforced monogamy is the social expectations to get people to enter into monogamous relationships or marriages, that would conclude that you are for socially enforced monogamy.
Yes.
Okay. That was... Sorry, we went on like a huge tangent. Okay, so why are you for socially enforced monogamy?
There are a number of benefits to having a person or persons with whom you can confide your deepest and most troubling feelings, emotions, and most embarrassing or unpresentable self.
But you don't necessarily have to be married to do that. Nor you... What if you
Not
don't also...
necessarily.
And you don't necessarily have to be in a monogamous relationship to do that. You can have friends who do that. You can have multiple people who do that if you're in a polygamous relationship, right?
As I had said before, that the issue with whether or not you get married isn't necessarily about getting married, having sex with one person or not. It was about the consequence therein of not doing so. So if here's where we're having an issue, right? I don't think that you have to get married immediately to somebody, because if you don't develop the kind of character necessary for a relationship like that, it's not going to work. Just like you said, there's going to be consequences to it, right? You should be off a level of maturity and know yourself well enough to know that it's what you want. However, there are still consequences therein of, let's say, I went over this so many times. It's just like with Mars. I'm saying the same thing kind of repeatedly.
Yeah, and you guys are
fine
both,
with people having casual sex.
and you guys are equally both as like really, really bad at explaining this. So all I'm asking you is, you think, and we've already established this, you are for socially enforced monogamy because you think that there are a lot of benefits to people entering into marriages or monogamous relationships, and there are consequences to them not doing so.
Consequences to not entering into a monogamic relationship?
Or just not getting married or not entering into monogamous relationships.
Yes.
Okay, so what I am saying is that currently we have a socially enforced, we have a society that is, in many ways, social enforcing monogamy. However, that has led to bad outcomes. That has led to people getting married to people, and it ends up divorce rates. It gets to people, just feeling slut-shamed and all of this bad stuff. So my question is that we should not do that. We should allow people, hey, if you want to be married, if you want to enter into a monogamous relationship, that is fantastic. If you don't, that is okay too. Having the social expectations for people to, now it's not to say that there should not be any social expectations for people, but when it comes to their own personal romantic relationships, I think trying to force expectations on that is a very, very, and it's already proven itself as a very bad idea.
I think a part of the issue with all this is that the opposite outcome hasn't quite been tried.
Yeah, but that's
the consequences of, let's say, complete polyamorous society better or worse than that of one with social enforced monogamy?
Yeah, but the thing is that most people don't decide to be in monogamous relationships because they're forced to. It's not like people aren't. The vast majority of people probably wouldn't describe themselves to polyamorous relationships in general. I don't think that people who do should be slut-shamed for it. What I am saying is that we should let people do as they please based on who they are, and then adjust society accordingly. Because you are correct that we really aren't sure what happens if we just kind of let that happen, if we just kind of let people do what they feel and please. However, we do know what happens when we try to force it, or we try to have these expectations when it comes to people's romantic relationships, which is what happened in the 50s, which led to the sexual revolution, which led to an entire breakdown of all these things, because we tried too hard to take men and women and fit them into these roles. So now we're in a society where we're like, okay, let's start experimenting. Maybe instead of having the man go to work, the woman stay home, maybe it can be the other way around. Maybe we can have both parents work and they can sort of take on both duties, gender roles. That's what we're trying to do right now, is we're sort of experimenting with these different things. And it seems as time goes on that things are doing better than they were in, say, the 50s in terms of people's happiness and fulfillment. And we're trying to find this, and we're trying to find a society that sort of has that equilibrium. My issue when it comes to people who, such as yourself, who sort of agree with socially enforced monogamy is the key to solving the chaos in our current society, is that we already tried that and it failed. Something didn't go something didn't go. It's not like aliens came down and fucked it up. It failed. It didn't work. It was because we tried to go against human nature and we tried to fit people in the boxes. That did not work.
I think the systems were far too oppressive, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So in this case,
I don't think it should be a political, like I said before, I don't think it should be a social program based in law or government.
Yeah,
Definitely don't think that.
Book put it perfectly. If there was a widespread expectation for it, not meeting it would lead to you being seen as a failure. So that is the entire issue with having the expectation for not being for like social monogamy or marriage, because if you don't do that, then you will be seen as a pariah or a failure. That will eventually lead to people just doing it even if they don't want to, which will in turn lead to people marrying people they don't want to, having kids with people they don't want to, which leads to higher divorce rates, unhappy children, etc., etc., etc.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. I hear what you're saying, and I agree, right? I think a part of it is the steps that one has to, and this is why I keep touching on virtue and, growth. Uh, in order for someone to even consider getting married, I think that there should still be like a social expectation for you to be in a position where you are both mature enough and, financially well enough, and knowing yourself well enough to even be able to, you know, enter into that kind of situation. If you are, let's say, very far removed from being able to do that, let's say you're an incel, for example, you don't shower, you live off the government, you browse 4chan and post memes or whatever they do, you are failing, just not at marriage. You're failing at 100 other things before you're failing at that.
Yeah.
And
So yeah, there should be. I think I totally agree with you. There should be certain social expectations, or to encourage people to be functioning members of society. But when people usually talk about the incel problem in relation to, say, enforced monogamy, is that they think that, like, oh, this will solve it.
Send in the women. Fuck the incels.
Because
literally.
because then women. Well, it's like, oh, well, if we shamed women for fucking like all the women for fucking Chad, then they would fuck these incel guys. Like that actually wouldn't happen at all. That actually
that's completely far removed from like any idea that I've had presented.
Well, not necessarily you, but like that was like Jordan Peterson's entire
I
point.
agree.
That's all I'm saying.
No,
yeah.
Not Jordan Peterson. I think a lot of his followers would see it that way.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is that in this case, we can't control we can't control who people want to fuck. We can't say like, hey, women, you shouldn't all want to fuck Chad. You have to fuck Eugene over here who doesn't shower. And so in that case, the solution would be not to say, hey, if you have casual sex to do this, or you should be shamed for it, or should be encouraged to be monogamous. It is to, hey, how do we help these guys adjust to that element of human nature and allow them to be more competitive in the sexual marketplace? That is all I am saying. Is that we instead of trying to control human nature, we have to try and obviously there are certain social expectations. Of course there are. But when we're talking about something this extreme, like when it comes to like people's desire on who they want to be with for the rest of their life, or people who want to have sex with, or people who want to have children, if we try to control that, it's going to end badly. So we have to accept that and then try to work in our society and do other things that will help make that lead to less chaos in our society.
I do agree that we should encourage people to be ready and functioning members of society.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
I don't agree that people will make the decision for themselves.
Why?
Because they don't.
What do you mean?
We've seen that. People don't make good decisions for themselves.
What do you mean?
People oftentimes make decisions that are bad for themselves as well.
So what's an example on like a mass scale, would you say?
Let's say the obesity crisis right now, for example.
Well, the obesity crisis is caused by a lot of things that aren't just done by. Again,
in the end, it's still what you put in your face.
Yeah, but this is sort of like a naive understanding of like psychology. It's sort of like saying it's like, well, it's like, hey, like certain areas have higher crime rates. And people say it's like, well, if the criminals just didn't commit the crime, well, yeah, they're still making the choice to commit the crime. But if you like act like in terms of like basic simple psychology, there are certain things that lead to a much higher likelihood of certain. It's like, it's not like it's just like some people just randomly decide to sort of like just decide to do crime. It's actually very related to, say, income, to environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And
now, of course, we are humans. We are responsible for our actions. But it also is completely true that certain things are more inevitable depending on one's circumstances or environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that case, to your point, you are correct in the sense that humans won't necessarily make the best decisions for them. However, in that case, I would argue that it would be society's responsibility to form a society where people are able to have the knowledge to make the good decisions, not to force them to not make them or force them to do certain things, but to give them all the information, give them the best possible chance to and the opportunity to make those good decisions. Some people will still make bad decisions, absolutely. But the more we improve the lower rungs of society, the more we will see the less people we will see making bad decisions. And that's just basic psychology.
You said information.
Mm-hmm.
I know when people know things, it doesn't really mean that, like the smoking thing on the box that says it's gonna kill you. And of course, nicotine addiction is a whole different bucket of worms. But like I said before, people just plainly make bad decisions knowing full well it's a bad decision. The psychology behind it matters a whole lot, and I agree. I want to be a psychologist one day. However, at the end, we still have to acknowledge that the decision is being made.
And I don't
primarily.
And again, I don't disagree that like we shouldn't hold people accountable for their actions. But for example, it's not exactly a coincidence that the higher rates of like better sex ed in certain like areas, or I should say, the lack of sexual education in areas leads to a higher rate of teenage pregnancy. That is
of course, information is golden.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Are there still young girls and boys who will still have sex and have children as teenage pregnancies? Absolutely. However, the more that we give people these resources, so for example, quality sexual education to kids, we have proven objectively, demonstrably, that those rates go down.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
So
that's just
Yeah, so what I'm saying, instead of trying to say, in that case, if we're trying to, hey, how do we lower the rate of teenage pregnancy? The answer isn't to shame girls or like try to like demonize sex or make it scary or something like that. The answer would be to, hey, let's give them the information. Let's give them the proper sexual education, which once again has shown demonstrably, objectively, that this does result. Because again, I mean, maybe we have different views of human nature. Are there people who do make bad decisions regardless? Of course they do. But on the whole, again, as we've seen demonstrably, if people are given the proper information, the right guidance, they will, on their own accord, usually make the best decisions.
Sorry. Guidance is?
Sorry, I wouldn't say the best decisions. I would say decisions that usually turn out for more responsible outcomes.
That guidance in itself would still be social enforcement.
It would. So this is the discussion we had last time. I disagree with that. Because, so for example, if I said, hey, if you want to be in a monogamous relationship, that is fantastic. Here are the pros and cons. If you don't want to be, fantastic. Here are the pros and cons. But I'm not going to like shame you or like give you false information or try to push you into one direction. All I am doing is giving you the information and allowing you to make the choices that is best for you.
Here's where that comes apart. All right. I gave you the information. You're well informed on what the best decision is, right? Mm-hmm. However, we're human beings. We go outside. Everybody else is making the complete opposite decision.
What is an example of that happening?
What are they going to do when you make the? All right, let's say let's say you meet some friends, right? And you haven't been drinking before this, but then you go around some friends that are alcoholics, and they start encouraging you to drink. Okay. That is in itself a kind of encouragement. It's enforcement, right, of alcoholism, and then they get you into the habit, right? They get you into a very bad habit.
But you agree that's bad, right? That you agree that people... Bad. Yeah, so people...
But that guidance, it's still social enforcement, even if it's something positive. It doesn't have to be negative to be social enforcement.
Well, no,
even
because
that guidance is what I've been arguing for this whole time.
No, that is completely a non sequitur, because that is what we call peer pressure. If I am in a group of friends and they're all drinking and they're like, hey, you should drink, the reason I would then drink is because I would feel the pressure, like, oh, if I don't drink, I won't fit in. I'll be the pariah of this group. If I said, actually, I don't want to drink, and they all said, yeah, it's cool, man, no worries about it, no pressure, then that is like the exact opposite of that's not guidance at all.
Trying to draw a line between peer pressure and social enforcement is very difficult, because
no, it's not at all.
It's the community.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what people say to you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what you're expected to do.
No, but no, it's not. Yeah, but exactly. But when we have expectations,
I think your definition of social enforcement is too narrow in that sense.
No, what I'm saying is that your definition of social enforcement is way too broad, that it's almost like ridiculous. If I go to someone and say, hey,
okay, what do you think social enforcement is exactly?
Sure. Any sort
I don't think we did that.
Any sort of enforcement for people to do something that is driven primarily by that person feeling that there will be either positive or negative outcomes that will be implemented upon society. So, for example, if I say, hey, smoking is bad for you, and that person smokes anyway and they get lung cancer, that isn't social enforcement, because I am not the one who gave that person lung cancer.
So what is social enforcement?
Dude, real quick, I'm trying to give you an example. So in that case, that is not social enforcement, because if that person ends up smoking and gets lung cancer, they knew that going into it. They made the decision. There is no social element that's making that happen. However, if someone said, hey, if you keep smoking, I am not going to associate myself with you. Or actually, here, let's do it better to connect it to your point. You're in a group of friends and we're all smoking, and one person's like, hey, I don't want to smoke. And the other people around you say, well, if you're not going to smoke, you're not cool. What will end up happening is that person, with peer pressure, the social environment is of people saying, hey, if I don't smoke, I am going to be sort of like the outcast of this group, which will make them that more likely to smoke and do something bad for them. And so to relate this back to monogamy, if someone doesn't want to be in a monogamous relationship and wants to be in an open relationship, but they look around and they feel as though if I enter an open relationship, or I don't get married or enter a relationship by a certain age, people will start to view me in a negative light. That is going to make it more likely for that person to do that thing they don't necessarily want to do.
Is that social enforcement in your eyes?
Absolutely.
So people around you being married, who will view you in a negative light for not doing it yourself, is social enforcement.
Absolutely. Because why would they view you in a negative light for not doing something you don't want to do?
Okay, and if the people around you in any other setting view you negatively for, let's say, not participating or not meeting that expectation, isn't it still the same social enforcement? Does it have to be marriage?
Wait, what do you mean?
Is it only social enforcement in the instance of marriage?
No, literally, it's we're talking about socially enforced monogamy. If we're talking about social enforcement,
oh yes,
that can be put towards anything, just like smoking or drinking.
Yeah, so it's still social enforcement, even if it's something. It's any kind of expectation from a group of people, would be social. Okay.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, we agree that there are certain things. There are certain elements of social enforcement that are good. We have a society that socially enforces the expectation that you aren't going to go out and curb stomp old women walking down the street. Yeah. I think that's a good thing for society in general. If we have we expect people to not curb stomp old ladies into the sidewalk. Yeah. I think that's a good thing that we can.
That is a good thing.
Yeah. And like that is a certain expectation that I think that we can sort of all agree as a good thing for society as a whole. However, if we apply that to people's decisions with whom to sleep with or enter relationships with, that is where things get bad, because we are basically trying to enforce expectations on people to make decisions that they may not want to make, or things that really don't have anything to do with us, driven not by a greater desire to help society as a whole, but rather just because it feels weird, because in our views it just seems weird, or it seems odd. And like, it goes back to our original discussion about, say, oh, well, what's wrong with someone being in an open relationship? And you said, well, that might lead to this, that might lead to that might lead to this. The problem with that is that is adding a bunch of other things to the equation, not non-monogamy.
Adding a bunch of other things to the equation.
Yeah, so that's what happened last time too, when I was like, what is wrong with someone having like casual sex? And he's like, nothing. But if that person fucks someone who I hate, or if that person fucks someone who ended up being a drug dealer or a felon, but those are separate things that we can talk about. Those aren't, again, we're talking about monogamy, not necessarily anything else in that equation.
It's very difficult to argue along the lines of something without considering any of the variables involved.
Yeah, but that could be said for everything. So, for example,
well, yes.
Yeah, but
yes.
it gets to the point where then it just becomes, or we can make up a hypothetical scenario, like, hey, maybe you do get married, but then maybe you get divorced 10 years down the line.
That is literally what you've done.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that if we look at our society, we have demonstrable proof that this is the outcome of social enforced monogamy. So when people say, hey, we actually need more socially enforced monogamy to sort of like repair society, I would argue that this is demonstrably not true. Okay. Now the other argument is okay, so what if we didn't do that? What if we tried to loosen these expectations on people? Well, to your point, we don't really know, because we haven't really gotten to that point yet. However, what's frustrating is that people don't seem to even be willing to give it a chance. They're just like, no, we need to go back to how we used to do things, even though those things were not good. Even though, like, we have demonstrable proof this was not the... It's kind of like, here's a better metaphor for it. You and I are driving down the road, and we're trying to get to a certain destination. We go down Road A, and we get to Road A, and it's a roadblock. There's like a cliff at the end. And so we turn around, and we go back, and we go down Road B. Now, we keep driving down Road B, and we don't know where Road B ends up. And it might lead to a dead end, or it might lead to where we're going. However, now we have a lot of people saying, actually, we don't know where Road B is going. Let's go back down Road A and hope for the best this time.
Fear of the unknown.
Yeah. So, but my contention is that I am not necessarily saying this will be the best outcome. I'm saying that if one person's suggestion is to, hey, we should go down this bad road because we don't know where the unknown road leads, well, that doesn't make any sense, because that's a decision based on fear and feelings as opposed to logic and reason.
Okay. Would you like some logical and reasonable examples of some consequences of this not working out?
Wait, what do you mean?
There was a story, for example, not a story as in like, more like an article that I read. It was about a polyamorous relationship. However, this is one of those ones where there was 4 guys and 1 female living together, right? And they were all said to be in a polyamorous relationship.
Okay.
I think it was 3 at first, and then 1 new guy came in, and he decided he was going to do the do, and he got the female pregnant with his child. Yes?
Okay.
Now, if it is that this is completely well functioning and that they are in a relationship, then I'm not saying that they should all equally be expected to have that investment in the child. However, to expect that things like, humans being generally, say, monogamous creatures by nature, at least for the first 5 years of the child's life, that they should at least care about it enough to not have beaten it to death.
Wait, I'm sorry. You kind of... I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you start over and try to say that more
One
clearly?
person, one of the 4 males of the polyamorous relationship had killed the child. And I'm very sure that the majority of, say... Well, not the majority. How do I phrase this? a lot of the times when you have, let's say, single mother that has like a boyfriend or, a stepfather, too often it happens where the child is in some way abused or sexually assaulted
What are the rates
by
of that?
that.
What are the rates of that occurring?
Too high.
What
And
what
I
is
can't.
what what is a percentage? I need a percentage. You can't just
If I
say
give it at that point, I'd have to start asking you for percentages as well.
no,
But
no, 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 no. Fuck that shit. Because what you're saying is like, hey, we shouldn't do this because look at this one case where something went bad. I am asking
you've
you.
done that this whole
No,
conversation.
no, no, no. What I am
You said
saying.
that.
No, what I am saying is that the other way we have demonstrable evidence. Oh, like not just a one bad case of like, hey, this couple I knew got married and they weren't happy and they got a fight and one of them beat the other one to death. That's one case. I am talking about major statistics over the last 50 years of the institution of marriage breaking down, the divorce rate going higher over hundreds of millions of people. You are talking about a single instance of a polyamorous relationship where one of the people, for I don't even know what reasons he did it, but he beat the child to death. I don't know why. Do you know why he did it? Was it actually because he was jealous or because he was in a polyamorous relationship, or did the person just have mental issues and beat the child to death because of that reason?
This entire conversation, I've offered these scenarios, or you've offered these scenarios. When I gave you such a reply, you were willing to take it.
What?
And you're doing that same thing to me now.
What do you
You're saying that this is an isolated scenario and that it doesn't actually mean anything. However, you've done that
Yes.
the whole time.
What? How have I done it the whole time?
Very commonly, I will give you an example, or I'll have a reply, and then you'll bring up a scenario of, say, consequences of that, and say that that makes it somehow
I don't need to give you
invalid.
I don't need to give you a scenario. I can give you a plurality of evidence.
We have the internet. We could Google it right now. At the very least.
No, I'm telling you right now. It's like when we tried to do social enforced monogamy, like try to like usher people into roles, it ended badly. It ended with just this section. It ended up blowing up to such with so much repression and all this stuff that led to the sexual revolution. Today, it is still going on, which leads to slut shaming, which leads to higher divorce rates. So what I am saying is that we need to lower those expectations and just let people do what they want. What you were saying is we shouldn't do that because if we do, some people might enter into polyamorous relationships, and maybe there would be a case where one of those people then results in like beating a child to death. And
Abuse
that is
of the children.
and that is an and then like you kind of like went on a tangent there. You said like, well, often if a mother has a boyfriend or stepdad, there is abuse in the child. If you have statistics related to that, that would be that might be interesting. But you don't have the statistics for that. So
I didn't exactly come with statistics.
Well,
you haven't either.
Well, hang on. If you're not gonna come with statistics, then don't make statistical claims.
Okay. Do we want to do this a purely logical conversation? But because that's not possible with things like values and social expectations.
So what I am saying is that when we're talking about what is best for trying to figure out what is best for society, socially enforced monogamy as it exists, as we know it, as it has been tried, has not worked. It has a
consequence. Yes.
It has led to very bad consequences. So right now we're in a position of like, okay, what if we tried to relax those expectations? And your argument is that, well, that also might lead to bad consequences.
No. My argument was that these are some of the things that happen when we go down road B.
Yeah, absolutely. But
don't know. You said it hadn't been tried. I'm saying that and I gave you an example of here's how it can go wrong. I'm not saying that this is going to be the norm or that it's going to happen at a 50% rate.
Yeah.
Just that. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, but there are always going to be possibly bad. There are always going to be possibly bad consequences. The issue is that people are trying to use like these potentially bad consequences and saying that this is why we should go back to the thing that we know doesn't work, which doesn't make any sense.
This is why we go back to the thing that doesn't end up in that particular consequence. you're a lot less likely, although it is possible, especially if you say go into a bad marriage where, there isn't any compatibility out of expectations, to be abused by one of the parents, especially if they're having a lot of stress with each other. And like I've said before, I completely agree with that. I can agree that we should lower the expectation. The expectation shouldn't just, like I've said before, the expectation should not be that we just jump into marriage. Like I said, I've agreed with that. I said the expectation should be that you set yourself up in a way where you're actually ready for a commitment like that, just being a generally more functional person.
But what I'm saying is that in like a certain our current society where like we spoke about this before about like people not having enough income to be able to raise a family or to buy a house, what happens if those people don't end up getting there? What if, like, you said that they shouldn't just jump into it, they should like prepare themselves to be married, but what if someone's like, there are people who get to age like, late 20s, early 30s and they aren't married yet? What do you think is going to happen if there's still an expectation for them to get married and they're not ready to?
Sorry, sipping water. What I think will happen with the expectation, I don't think that there is a possibility where we can have a world where people make completely well-informed decisions, sadly enough. Because people don't make completely well-informed decisions even if they have all the information.
No, as we have, but they make better decisions if they have these. So, like, as I just stated, if you look at, say, premarital or teenage pregnancy sex, the more information these kids are given, the lower.
And I agreed.
Will it ever?
I'm just saying.
Will it ever go to zero? Probably not.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, but the point I am making is that, of course, people are going to still make bad decisions even when they have all the information. However, the more information we give them, the less bad decisions, and eventually we will get to a point where that might cap out. But the answer, at least in my opinion, is not to just say to fuck with that at all, and let's try to make people by force, or not really by force, but really social pressure, social encouragement into these roles, because that's basically like making a house of cards. Because eventually that might work for a time, like it did in the 50s, but eventually it'll all fall apart again. It's not a long-term solution.
And I agree to an extent, but picture this. If let's say, we have the perfect society where the goal is to be able to support children and, a marriage, not to have a marriage and have children, but to put yourself in a position where you can be that person. And a lot more people, let's say, pair up and they get married, right? And they have children. And the outliers are still there. That don't feel like they're prepared. Those people, we can't say that those people shouldn't have gotten married because them being married presents the expectation or that they are in some way failing. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We can't say that the successful should stop being successful because they're successful. Yeah?
So what I am saying is that, like, you're saying that we should encourage people to be in positions where so they can be married, but there's still an expectation for them to get married. But what I am saying is that is still bad, because if people go throughout life and, like, let's say they they're born into a low income neighborhood and they grow up and they get to that age, then they will still be in a position where they are pressured to do something even when they are not in the position to do it.
Even if we don't verbally pressure them at all. Let's say nobody's told you. You just see everybody else doing it. There's still that peer pressure. That's just human nature.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we're trying. That's exactly the entire point. There is an element of that. We are trying our best in society to counteract that to some extent. To not exacerbate it, to not make it worse. Of course, there will always be an element of social pressure and stuff, of course. But what we're trying to do is to exacerbate it, or is to make it worse, or to sort of make it worse and make it even more intense.
I think we've inadvertently done that, though.
What do you mean?
Thinking about self-improvement culture, fitness gurus, you can do it.
Oh, absolutely. No,
that's social enforcement in itself.
Yeah, but that's the entire point of the body positivity movement. the entire point is like, hey, there's nothing wrong with being healthy, but the alternative is to not say, hey, if you're fat, you're a lazy piece of shit. That's all. Like, that's all people are
Like they
saying.
don't do that. Like
Wait, I'm
just
sorry.
like
What?
health, like just like let's say you're a health guru, right? You're saying you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, even if you're just mediocre at it and there's not anything necessarily wrong with you. That kind of high expectation for what you should be at any given time is still there.
Yeah, but this goes to body image. It's not about being, if you have a certain social expectation for a certain body image. So let's take guys who like, hey, you have to have, the expectation is guys to have 6-pack abs and like really broad, rough shoulders. If guys can't do that, or if they don't make it, that's going to result in bad things. It's going to result in low self-confidence, insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So the answer would be is to not try to like just, hey, let's have a society where we like give people free gym passes so they can all manage to like be that way. It's to, hey, let's try not to push this as much. Let's not say it's like, hey, if you don't have a 6-pack, doesn't make you any less of a person. That's all we're really saying. And so that's kind of,
and have a society where what would be encouraged in that society? Just
what?
complete. I think there should be like maybe a good framework would be the social enforcement surrounding very reachable goals, let's say.
Yeah,
especially.
Or no, but so what I'm saying, so I think now I kind of get what I'm saying. So in your view, if there was no social enforcement of, say, being fit, that the vast majority of people would just be fat slobs, because people on average will just make decisions that are not good for them.
No.
Okay, so hang on. So what I am saying is that, well, hang on. But didn't you just go into saying it's like human nature means that people will not make good decisions? If people are not,
people will not make good decisions. Yes.
Yeah, but that's always going to be the case no matter what.
Oh yeah,
society.
always. I agree. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that we should not try to form a society where we're just basing it around those people who make bad decisions to try and force them to make good decisions, because that'll result in pressure being applied to everyone, and that's not good.
Then what do we do about people who make bad decisions? What's the goal?
People who make bad decisions, even though they've been given, we have like a good society where like everyone is given like the right information to make good decisions.
All right, we're all given the right information to make good decisions. A lot of us are making, let's say, good decisions, especially, and there would still, be social enforcement involved with that because good decision. Yeah. What do we do about people who want that kind of motivation, that want that kind of kick in the butt, that need it, especially?
You can give people encouragement to do certain things, but to not push them into a certain thing. So for example, you can encourage someone like, hey man, if you want to get fit, or if you want to be like have a 6-pack, that's awesome, man. Here's how to do it and stuff. What that is not is saying, hey, if you don't have a 6-pack, if you aren't like ripped, then you're a failure to some extent. Those are two completely
encouragement, not consequence.
Yeah, but the issue is that I am having is that when you kind of said like, oh, we should encourage people to get married, it still will result in a situation where these people will still feel the pressure to do so. My suggestion would be to not do it at all. Is to just say, hey, if you want to get married, great. If you want to have kids, awesome. If you don't want to, that's fine. If you communicate to me that you want to be married or find or be in a fulfilling monogamous relationship or have kids, okay, let's encourage you on how to reach those goals. But that is completely different than setting up those expectations for people who may not want those goals. Because what you're saying is you are setting expectations for an entire populace. There is a difference between encouraging someone who wants a particular thing and setting the expectation of that person to do something even if they don't want to do it. Those are two complete, encouragement and expectation are not even remotely close.
Encouragement and expectation.
In that sense, they are not close. Because in one hand, you're saying, hey, I want to be married. Okay, yeah, let's encourage you how to be ready for it, how to find a good partner, to be financially well off so you can raise a child. Okay. But the reason I am encouraging you is because you have vocalized that this is what I want. This is what I want for myself. However, if I set an expectation for you, let's say you just, hey, I don't know if I want to be married. But if I have the expectation that you should get married, then regardless of whether or not you want to get married, there is still the expectation there for you to get married.
Matthias Theo says, some people think that because something came for evolution or because it is natural, it is morally good. Not sure if this is the case. Well,
what about
do
that?
I have an answer for that? Let's see. Like I said, I'm agreeing with you that extremely high expectations do have the consequence of extremely negative feelings of dejectment. Let's look at Asian countries, for example, like Japan, where work and success and Singapore, where work and success are such a high priorities that people, when they fail, they just kind of jump off a building. Right? Completely
Absolutely.
agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I don't want a society like that at all. As for encouraging people to get married, I still do think we should encourage monogamy. Like I said before, it's not necessarily marriage, it's more about the children.
Okay, but no, now we're adding something else. If we're saying it's like, hey, if you want to have children, then you should be monogamous. I guess that's one thing, but we're not really talking about children. We're just talking about...
Oh, yeah, I said that at the start. Like, if you're an adult with your own agency, the only consequence that should be relative to everyone around you is what affects everybody around you. And so it's not that you're making a decision to affect everyone around you. It's that you're running a risk that oftentimes ends up affecting those around you.
So it's not socially enforced monogamy. It's socially enforced monogamy only if you want to or have kids.
Well, I prefer that. Like, or let's say, for example, if you made this decision... Words. If you made the decision around 30 years old that you definitely don't want children, and that you're going to focus on your career, and that you're not off the character or person to get married, you're like, okay, I'm going to have casual sex, but to mitigate that, I'm going to use like an IUD or some kind of long-term contraceptive, and you accept the consequences of that, and you have the money for, let's say, anything where you run that risk of having excessive casual sex, and by the end of your life you've saved enough money to not be a burden on the pension system. I think all of those go to, all right, this is an individual, non-collectivist life where only my responsibility to myself are of what is words are of precedent.
Okay, so you just added you just kind of went like a lot of stuff. So let's just back it up to what you were saying. A person is like, say, like 25 years old. They decide, you know what? I don't want to be in a monogamous relationship. I don't want to have kids. I just want to live my life, fuck around, and just, you know, not enter a marriage, not have kids, not do any of that. Just live my life. In that case, should that person be shamed or encouraged to not do that, or should they just be like, hey, good job, man, you have fun,
do it responsibly?
What do you... Well, yeah, but that applies to everything. To, like, again, yeah, but that's not but what I'm talking about is, like, in that case, that person shouldn't be encouraged to not do it, or they shouldn't be encouraged to do something different or shamed because they're doing it, right?
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'll shame you once the consequence comes around. If you have like a 14-year-old son that you never owned that runs up to me in the street and slaps me for a gang initiation, I'll shame you for it.
Yeah, but now we're adding in other things that don't have to do with monogamy.
It's just for conversation's sake.
No, but I'm trying to.
I agree.
I'm trying to keep us focused on this particular thing because that's what we came to talk about. So all I am saying is that if we are in a society where a young guy who is 25, or say a young girl who is 25 years old, is sort of looked at as a pariah in society because they don't want to have kids or have a traditional monogamous relationship or enter a marriage, I don't think that is a good thing. That is all I'm saying, and that we should not have the socially enforced monogamy of trying to have expectations for that individual to do that, even if it's something they don't want to do.
Even if it's something they don't want to do.
especially.
I think that's
especially
if it's something they don't want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. If someone wants to get married, go for it. But that's not socially enforced monogamy because they're making the decision to do it on their own accord. All I am saying is that I think everyone should be able to make decisions they want to do is good. But if we start to enter expectations on what people should do, inevitably what will happen is that if people decide to not go with those expectations, that society will look down upon them. And that is not a good outcome. Because inevitably that will lead to those people being pressured to do so they're not pariahs, which will lead to bad outcomes, whether it's divorce, children born into families who never wanted them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I've agreed with that like 100 times. So I agree that we should...
So you were against socially enforced monogamy?
God damn it. Just leave it. So I'm on the call. Am I against socially enforced monogamy? Still no. I still think it should be encouraged.
Yeah, but what I'm saying
I don't think it should be a thing where you're shamed for it.
Shamed for what?
For not getting married.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if we have an expectation that people should get married, if people don't get married, inevitably what that will lead to is that people looking at those people as a pariah.
I don't think we can avoid that.
Well, no, we can avoid that by not having socially enforced monogamy. By just having a society that says, "Hey, if you want to be married and have children, that's cool. If you don't, that's cool too." And we instill that in people from a young age, and not to not look at people who don't get married by 30 or don't have kids by 30 as some sort of pariahs or like there's something wrong with them, which is what our society is today.
Yeah, I just don't think that we can avoid the fact that other human beings are going to judge other human beings based on expectations.
But we can.
We can't avoid that.
But we can if we don't set those expectations.
Who sets the expectations?
People in a particular society.
Anybody that does the things that they are expecting, especially.
Not
or raised.
Not necessarily. I'm in a monogamous relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean that if a friend of mine is not in a monogamous relationship or a polygamous relationship, that I look down upon them. That is set
by
more
definition, even with like the peer pressure involved, even if we said nothing to those people, they would still feel out of place in the society because they're surrounded by monogamous people.
But that depends. But then you have to ask yourself, how many of those people who are in monogamous relationships are in monogamous relationships not because they want to be, but because they also feel like they should be in a monogamous relationship. This is what happened in the 50s, where a lot of people, hey, you're supposed to get married. Okay, so everyone gets married. And so there are people who did want to get married, but they look around and like 95% of people around them are married, and you are correct. The higher rates of it, the more peer pressure there will be. Today we
can't avoid that.
Yeah, today we are in a society where that is starting to break down, where people are deciding to not enter into marriage or monogamous relationships, and that is giving people more comfort in saying, hey, if I don't want to be married, I don't have to. I don't feel like a pariah because there are other people like me. That's great. But if we encourage marriage, if we try to set expectations for people to get married, the more people who do and fall in those expectations will inevitably lead to it being a more peer pressure, more expectations being set for people.
And so as for human nature, communities of people who are refusing to get married are also shaming others for it.
Wait, what?
Have you seen like Facebook hate groups about people who hate breeders?
Yeah, fuck those people. Yeah, those people suck.
Anti-natalists, for example.
Yeah, but
saying that you shouldn't bring children into the world because you're going to make them miserable and life is suffering. Yeah, environmentalists who are saying
whoa, stop. Yeah, those people suck. If those people are trying to set expectations, no, we agree. Because those people are shaming people for not doing a certain thing. But the problem is that you are doing the exact same thing when you do it to the other side.
I'm saying it's inevitable. It's just
what do you
humans
mean?
Judging each other is inevitable.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the more that we push to judge the people who judge people, that will lead to people being less judged for their choices.
So we use the stones to destroy the stones in that sense.
Yeah, basically, it's sort of like it kind of is like the conversation we had with the last guy when he was like, hey, I think that it's okay to join a group of people and hate on the KKK. I think that is totally fine. And he's like, well, I don't think that we should ever form groups to try to, like, subjugate people. And it's like, well, no, we kind of have
that's
to.
what we did.
Yeah, well, of course, we have to. It depends on what we are subjugating.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Like I said before, social enforcement for certain things is fine. We are socially enforced to not kick dogs when we go out for a run during the morning and we see someone walking their dog and we just like kick it in the face. There is a social enforcement against not doing that, which is good. I think that is a good instance of social enforcement that leads to a functioning society. But if we are trying to socially enforce things like what people do with their bodies and who people decide to love and how people decide to arrange their own romantic relationships, that will lead to inevitably bad outcomes.
You'd still be doing that.
What do you? Okay. Even if that is true, I don't necessarily agree with it. Even if that is true, you agree that we should do whatever we can to reduce it as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. So
if we say be responsible, we're still trying to define what they do with their body. What if somebody says, okay, I'm just gonna have a bunch of children and live on the welfare system as a single mother in a poor neighborhood? And encouraging responsibility is still, even if it doesn't affect us, we'd still be encouraging them to be responsible and not make such and such decisions. I'm saying, it's unavoidable, really.
But again, that is an instance where it is having negative effects. If that person wanted to, hey, I just want to go live in the woods. Okay, go ahead. If that person said, I'm going to have 7 children and then bring them out into the woods and like make them live off berries and shit, well, that would not be good because they are imposing that on other people. Again, we're talking about specifically, we're not talking about social enforcement all over. We're talking about specifically socially enforced monogamy. We're not talking about like all that other stuff. We're just talking about that particular thing. In that case, when it comes to people how to decide to arrange their romantic relationships, I do not think, and of course, like you said, there always will be peer pressure depending on what's around you. What I am saying is that we should not try to make that any worse than it already will naturally be, and we should try to work to say, hey, if someone doesn't get married or doesn't follow this like path, we should not shame them for it because it has no negative consequences.
I agree. I think it's partly up to the individual as well to decide that they're not going to be influenced solely by what's around them.
But again, like you said, it is human nature. So if everyone in their life is telling them, hey, you're not married by 30, you're a fucking loser, it is going to. Of course, there are going to be people who like have the fortitude to just say, yeah, fuck you, I'm just going to do what I want. However, on average, that is not going to happen, and that's what's sort of happening. And if you look at a lot more like smaller communities, people tend to conform to certain things because of social pressure. What we're saying is that, hey, we should just try to get rid of that, let people decide what they want to do. Of course, there will still be social pressure, but that's going to be up to the individual. But we're trying not to exacerbate it. Trying to promote socially enforced monogamy seems like an instance where we're trying to exacerbate something we shouldn't be exacerbating.
My personal opinion on monogamy, it differs, but I still largely agree that we should.
You can have your own personal view of what you should do, but what I'm saying is that we should not then impose that on other people. If like, hey, I want to be monogamous, I think that's the right way to go. But if you had a friend who was not monogamous, hey, I'm going to enter a polygamous relationship with a bunch of people, my advice to you was that trying to shame that person for doing that is not a good idea, and that will only.
Oh, the goal wouldn't be shame. I'd be encouraging them. But that goes back into the definition. Defining again.
Encouraging what though?
Monogamy? Or being married?
But then you are encouraging them to do something they don't want to do.
What if they do want to do it?
Then you can encourage them because you're just.
There you go. I won't know until you have to prod around a little with people before you even know what's going on. That's just a subjective person to person.
But what I'm
basis.
saying is that with currently when people talk about socially enforced monogamy, they are talking about trying to set expectations for people so they don't deviate away from that. They're trying to control it in a sense.
Yeah, and I don't agree with them. I
Yeah,
think we
okay.
should just
So
encourage people to be responsible in the decisions that they make.
no matter what
Especially
those no matter what those
no matter
decisions
what,
are.
no
Okay.
matter what those decisions are.
So I
To
don't
make
think
sure.
so I don't think in that case, just to kind of go back to this, at least from my definition of it or my perception of it, it doesn't seem like you are for socially enforced monogamy. You you personally believe that is sort of the way to go through life, but you're not trying to impose that on others.
Well, yes. I told you about Jordan Peterson that my reference was to what he said about it 3 years ago on the Joe Rogan podcast. He said, Joe Rogan asked him, what is socially enforced morality? Jordan Peterson said, all right, I have a son who has a fiance, and the son says, hey, Dad, I had 3 affairs in the last 9 months, and my wife has no idea. How great am I? And Jordan Peterson said that he would say, no, that's a terrible thing. You shouldn't be doing that. And he said that's socially enforced monogamy.
So this is another
it's
conversation.
never been about force.
So this is another conversation I've had with people. This, I would argue, that is not socially enforced monogamy, because once again we are adding in another element, which is betrayal. Because again, if I am in an open relationship and I said, hey, I have a girlfriend but I fucked 3 other chicks, well, I'm in an open relationship, my girlfriend knows about it, so there's nothing wrong with that, right? However, if I say to my girlfriend, hey, we're going to be monogamous and I am not going to sleep with anyone else, and then I do, it isn't a matter of sleeping with other people. The reason that is shamed, and I agree that I think we should shame that and not set expectations for that, is because you are betraying the trust of someone close to you. Yeah, but that isn't really socially enforced monogamy, because
socially enforced fidelity.
Yeah, right? but I think that's fine. I think socially enforced fidelity, when you have pledged to be, basically it's a social enforcement of staying true to your word, which I think is absolutely reasonable. But that 100%. That really is not the same thing as socially enforced monogamy. That's sort of where it gets to a weird. That's sort of where it gets to a weird, adding other things or stretching definitions and stuff like that I don't agree with. And that's sort of my issue with sort of Peterson's view on it. It's it kind of feels like even when he talks about it, he doesn't really make it clear.
It is a bit vague. Yeah, that's not very concise.
That's sort of what my issue is with it, where it's I don't really know what you're talking about, man. I am getting my ass kicked. But yeah, but in that case, by my definition of what I am using as and that's sort of why I wanted to try to set it up as an initial definition. In that definition of socially enforced monogamy is setting expectations for people to get married, and if they don't, they'll be outcast or they'll face social pressure for it. In that case, you do not agree with social enforced monogamy.
Yes, having a consequence to not being married, at least socially, by the people around you, is one thing. Having a consequence for being irresponsible with yourself is definitely, I think, the way to go. That people should discourage people from being irresponsible. And I think the two are oftentimes conflated because people don't really think to differ them that much. That if you are making the decision not to be monogamous, that you're making the decision to be something worse or bad, or
it's
irresponsible.
A great way to put that is hey, here's I'm walking across a rickety bridge across a canyon. If I say, hey, you shouldn't cross that because it looks really rickety, you could hurt yourself, and that person decides to and falls off, that's not really socially enforced because I didn't do anything. The consequences of their actions were predicated upon no one administered those consequences. However, if I said, hey, if that bridge is really rickety, if you try to cross it, I'm going to cut it and you're going to fall to your death. That is because the consequences are coming from an action of mine, right?
That's a bit extreme, but I see what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is the difference I am saying is that if something bad happens as a result of you pulling a particular action, that isn't necessarily socially enforced. By definition, it isn't. It's just the consequences of an action. However, if those consequences include people within your society acting a certain way towards you, or sort of like negative, what's what I'm looking for? Negative feedback or punishment towards that person, that is socially enforced, because you're taking the bad outcome and then you're adding something else to it that sort of like exacerbates that bad outcome.
Yeah, Jamaica's full of shame.
Yeah, and I don't agree.
If you do something stupid, we just say you're an idiot.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think I don't think shame ever works to deter people from actions. Because, or sorry, I shouldn't say that. I think it should be. I think shame can be used, but in certain circumstances that we all agree. So, for example, if someone cheats on their girlfriend, yeah, I think you should be shamed for that, because you decided to promise someone that you would be faithful, and you betrayed that person. You hurt their feelings. I absolutely think that should be shamed. However, if it comes to something where there is, again, if we're talking about monogamy, what someone decides to do with their own romantic relationships, like, hey, I'm not going to get married, I just want to have a kid and raise it by myself, shaming a person for doing that, I don't think is good, because what are you shaming them for? Because you're not shaming them for hurting other people, you're just shaming them because they didn't do the thing that you think they should be expected to do.
And again, it all depends on execution and consequences therein.
And so that is sort of, I think I said it before, but that's sort of my issue when it comes to like when we're talking about these, is because it's all about the execution. I agree, but people will say, well, I'm for socially enforced monogamy, and then I ask, okay, so what is the execution of it? What would a society that promotes socially enforced monogamy, what would it look like? And I've had a lot of conversations with people who aren't really able to answer that, and it's frustrating, because that's kind of the crux of the entire argument. Because then we don't even know what we're arguing.
Yeah, for me personally, it's just for the betterment of the children first, if you have them.
Yeah, so in your case, you're saying that I think we should encourage people to be in a monogamous relationship or be married if they decide to have children.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're an individual and
I think
you're by yourself.
And I think anyone can agree that that is a good thing. Statistically, and that's statistically proven. But again, that is socially enforced monogamy if you decide to have kids. So we're adding something on there. We're adding something on there when there's children involved. Absolutely. I think that would be, having a partner to help raise a child is always a good idea. Or like asking for help.
The argument's normally too broad, really. Or at least the answers are normally too broad. There's always the expectation that there is some much greater consequence to not doing a certain thing.
When it comes to socially enforced monogamy, my fear is that those consequences that people talk about, at least usually, especially here in the States, is more of a moral degeneracy consequence. Like there's no actual consequences. It's more in terms of a moral value level, and that gets really, really weird, because it's sort of a weird thing. It's sort of like somewhere out into ether, where it's like, oh, if a woman has a lot of sex, that means that she's somehow lacks virtue, even though if women who had plenty of sex with plenty of partners oftentimes had plenty of virtue, that what's the word prejudice stereotype wouldn't exist, really. Wait, sorry, what?
Well, the stereotypes exist by and large due to the consequences therein of the actions. If people who have a lot of casual sex have a lot of children out of wedlock and end up poor, and generally, I'm saying that things end up getting conflated.
Hang on, whoa. But we're not talking about that. I am just saying that, like, in the States especially, there is a very negative view of a woman who has a lot of casual sex.
Yeah, I was saying
that really isn't based on anything.
Well, yeah, I'm saying why people conflate the action with they think A means B,
Yeah,
even
but
if that's not the case.
the thing is that I don't actually think they think that. I think the thing is that they don't like it and they try to justify it somehow. So, for example, if you ask like a lot of guys, it's like, hey, would you want to date a girl who's had sex with other men? Or like who is like, like you get that a lot in like red pill or like incel circles. Oh, I want a girl with a low partner count. I want a virgin. And you say, okay, why? Well, the answer really, I would say almost always, is because there is some sort of insecurity, inadequacy there. There is a certain sort of feeling that a lot of guys feel, oh, I don't want her to have been with someone. It's almost like
And
I don't want another guy to have infringed on my territory.
and you
However,
wouldn't have. Oh, go ahead.
saying that isn't good. It's not socially acceptable because that makes you kind of sound like a dick. So what people do say is they'll sort of like try to latch onto logical reasons. It's like, oh, well, if a woman has a lot of sex, that means she has a higher rate of STIs, and I don't want that. That is technically true. The more sex you have with multiple people, the higher chance you do of contracting an STI. But is there actually someone who... But is that the real reason that you feel that way, or are you trying to justify it? When it comes to, say, socially enforced monogamy, we're talking about the consequences that these have in terms of... John, I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, like, in our nation, when people are saying socially enforced monogamy, they're talking about sort of like a... the consequences of that action. But then you ask them, well, what are the consequences? And if they say it's sort of like a more moral or ethical consequences, that's based on their own personal beliefs, not actual evidence. So what they'll do is they'll try to, what's the word I'm looking for? They'll try to latch on to something logical, even if it doesn't really make all that much sense. So like, again, what if she has a lot of children out of wedlock? It's like, okay, well, that's something different. You're adding something on there. Oh, what if she can't keep a relationship? Well, again, you're kind of adding something onto that equation.
And it isn't reasonable to assume somebody that sleeps with a lot of partners may not be the most, let's say, fidelity. What's the word? The most committed to a monogamous relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're someone who like, hey, I want to have a lot of casual sex, oh, well, I want a monogamous relationship, you two just don't fit values. However, that doesn't mean the person who is having a lot of casual sex is a lesser or less moral or virtuous person. It just means that they probably would not be someone you want to start a monogamous relationship with.
Yeah, I agree. That
Yeah.
wouldn't be someone you want to start a monogamous relationship with. And I think even whether or not that's the point that the people in your country make, it is still a reasonable thing to be wary of, that somebody that has an extremely high partner count may not be the most committed to a monogamous relationship. That's the same way here. And that we can really only judge people by their actions or the actions that they have taken. If somebody came to me very honestly, and it's very one-on-one, and they're like, all right, I want to put this all behind me, and I want to be honest with you about what's happened, and they explain themselves to me, and I can see, all right, they really want to do this, then, you can give them a chance in that sense. But of course, still be more of a risk. Let's say it doesn't have to be, but chances are. So I think really, we're at the point where it's all just very small details.
I think what we've come to is that neither of us really agree with with socially enforced monogamy as we defined it earlier. Okay, yeah. I think that's all we had to come to. I think that is what leads to, especially like with Jordan Peterson's social enforced monogamy solves the incel problem. I think he actually is right, but it's a short-term solution that will eventually lead to worse outcomes, and that is why it's frustrating when he said that. And I think, and again, I'm kind of going off inductive reasoning. I think the reason he said that, or like the reason he puts forth that argument is because it sounds, to, at least to me, more like it is more of a moral value thing with him, less than an actual like this is objectively the best thing. Because he seems more, based on things I've heard him say, sometimes it seems like, oh, he seems to come off as very logical and objective, but it seems like some of his positions seem to...
Yeah, he admits.
Yeah, he seems to have a certain worldview or outlook or value system, and he's trying to push that as opposed to just find the best or most logical solution, which is okay. Yeah, I mean, like, if you have a certain value system, like, you know, whatever, but it just kind of frustrates me when, hey, if that's what you want to do, just come out and say it. But don't try to, like, hide behind, like, slippery language or stuff like that. That's sort of, like, my gripe. It's like, look, if that's it, just come out and say it. Don't try to just, like, not, just sort of infer it. Just say it. Just own it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times the issue is that he's expected to have thought out everything he says on the same level as everything he has actually thought out, which is oftentimes a lot of things. And when he does say something that he hasn't fully thought out, I think he did a video on it recently, in fact. When he does say something on it, he says, like, well, maybe I need to think about it more. And then maybe a year or two later, you see him put out a 2-hour-long essay. I think he did one recently that I thought you guys were talking about, but I didn't watch it because, you know,
yeah. Well, again, when it comes to that, I think that is to some extent fair. But again, I haven't actually gotten more clarification on that, and I've heard him say other stuff in relation to like divorced couples and stuff like that, which kind of makes me, it at least gives me the impression that he has a certain worldview he wants to hang on to.
Well, he has been a divorce therapist. He has helped people through their divorces. So I'm just saying.
But I'm saying it. But I'm saying, is there I'm talking in terms of like morals and values, because the issue with that is that, because those can kind of, we all have those, but if we're trying to talk about something objectively, we need to kind of put those aside for a second. If you're like, at least with me, I still have a worldview, but it is basically how to maximize happiness for everyone in a society that doesn't lead to infringing on the rights of others. That's basically my philosophy. And I try to find the most logical solutions within that philosophy. However, if you're someone, if another person is someone who just wants to, like, so for example, how do we stop suicide? Well, if we took everyone and put them in asylums and kept them in padded rooms with like that, then the suicide rate would go to 0. But of course, we obviously can't do that because it infringes on people's freedom of choice, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to still balance those things. We can't just, and that is sort of my issue with the people when they talk about these ideas of like marriage. They think that it'll keep society together, but it's more of a band-aid as opposed to a what's the word I'm looking for? A permanent solution. I guess that's a better way to put it. It feels like when a lot of people talk about this, they are proposing band-aids as opposed to actually like sifting through the shit and actually finding a permanent solution that will help us progress. Otherwise, we'll just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah. By the end of this, we've changed our definitions on socially enforced monogamy. You said that?
Well, I don't think we changed it. I think we tried to establish it originally, and we tried to work it out. I think I think my original understanding of it is that there are certain like expectations set on people to do a certain thing in terms of their romantic relationships, and I don't like that. I think that is not a good thing. If we're talking about, hey, there should be, I have an expectation for you to make the best choice for your child, that is something completely different. Because that's not really, we're not talking about monogamy just in and of itself. We're adding in the welfare of a child, and that's something different.
Yeah, those things are always conflated.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that if we're just talking about straight what people decide to do sexually or like romantically or like relationships, that should be up to them because it doesn't affect anyone else. Trying to force them to do certain things will not end well, and I think the people's desire to force people into those is based more on like a moral value system as opposed to any sort of logical reasoning or betterment of society. People often say that, oh, society's breaking down, but they're not saying it in terms of like things are getting worse because of it. It's just society is not fitting my definition or my view of what I think society should be. So it's a very sort of emotionally driven approach, I guess I should say. Ow.
Have you beaten this level yet? I think I thought I was watching like a replay of the same footage over and over. Have you been playing the same boss repeatedly?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just getting my ass kicked. I usually am pretty good at it, but I'm just not doing good. I think I'm trying to. Usually, I'm pretty good at what's the word? Multitasking, but I just don't think I'm doing very good right now. But
I think it means you're engaged with the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just I just need something to kind of keep my hands busy. I think is really is it.
Yeah.
But no, I think we covered a lot of ground in this one. So I think we, in general, once we establish what exactly we're talking about, and that's always the hardest part because people end up having conversations about that. But I think once we establish that, I think we kind of both agree that we shouldn't try to force or. I agree with you that there will always be pressure to do certain things depending on the circumstances. I think it's best for our society to not lean into that and actually rebel against those. And of course they'll still exist, but our goal should be to not lean into them or to not exacerbate them. I guess that is all I'm saying.
And I can agree with that as well, so long as the things that we do lean into are really to prevent an exacerbation of burdens on the collective, on the society itself.
Yeah, of course. Like, I think we can both agree that, like, hey, we should socially enforce not beating your child. I think we can both reasonably agree on that. I think that's something that is totally fine to socially enforce because it is affecting the welfare of someone else and is leading to a worse society overall, or it is lowering
beating children.
Yeah,
I beat my nephew's ass that one time. Jesus Christ, you should have seen it. It was terrible. I felt so bad.
Yeah, well, I would say
that he never danced on the tables of the school again.
Yeah, but see, that's a case of like doing something that does have a short-term benefit, but might lead to longer bad benefits. If I don't want, a good way to think is I don't want kids to not do something because they fear they're gonna get like hit, like smacked upon the face. I want those kids to not do it because they just don't do it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
we spoke to him for like a year about it.
And that's sort of a better way to put how I think we should go about encouraging people. I don't want people to not do bad things because they are afraid of the consequences. I want people to not do bad things because they just are good people who don't do bad things. I think that's the society I
wish
want.
it always worked out that way.
I think
really do.
I think we are getting there. I think that's what's happening in society. That's what, like, again, if we go back to the sexual education thing, we are telling people, like, hey, look, we know your kids are going to have sex. Just be responsible about it. And what that is leading to is people being more responsible, being smarter, and not making irresponsible decisions. However, when we tell those kids, hey, you shouldn't have sex because God will come down and smite you or whatever the fuck, not only is that demonstrably proven. Yeah, not only is that demonstrably proven to increase the rates of teen pregnancy, but also even if a young girl or young boy doesn't end up having sex or doesn't result in a teen pregnancy because they're afraid of having sex, that is going to lead to a very warped relationship with sex and intimacy as they get older. That's sort of and I think, and again, telling kids, hey, if you have premarital sex, God will come down and smite you. It might reduce the chances that some kids will have teen pregnancy, maybe, but it will lead to worse long-term consequences that I think in the long run will hurt society and those people as a whole. And I think it's okay to sort of course there will be growing pains. We're going to have to try to figure out how to do this, and of course people will will slip through the cracks, and like there will be some bad things that happen, but overall, if it's all towards a good end, like every time we fail, we will figure out a better solution. You know, it
Yeah,
like
there's gonna go on.
Oh, go ahead.
There's gonna have to be a whole lot of levels to build on, especially in America. Uh, Especially because there has been varying consequences to, like, say, the sexual revolution or the lack of marriages or the single
Yeah,
parent homes.
but the
There's gonna be just
question,
a lot to build on before we get
yeah,
there.
the and this is something that I've heard. Does the sexual revolution have certain bad consequences? Yes. However,
Mm,
I think those were inevitable, and those are things we have to reckon with and learn how to live in balance. The
yeah,
solution is to not just, okay, screw it, let's just go back to how everything was before the sexual revolution. It's sort of like a great one-to-one comparison is exactly what's happening in Afghanistan. Do I think that us pulling out of Afghanistan has no bad consequences? Of course not. Do I think that maybe it was a band-aid we had to pull off eventually, and those bad consequences were going to happen like eventually, no matter what we did? I think so in general, and I think it was something I think we fucked up a lot of shit over there. But did I
like the
think
whole
that?
country.
Yeah, but did I think that we would have had to eventually pull out no matter what, all bad consequences and all? Yeah, but that is not to say, well, if we pull out, bad things will happen, so we should just stay there. Because what's going to happen is maybe things won't be bad right now, but over time, another 20 years, things will only get worse. And that's sort of my whole argument when it comes to this stuff. We need to rip the Band-Aid off and deal with it instead of just trying to find new Band-Aids for solutions. I think that's
Okay,
basically
so
what
rip
I'm
the
saying.
band-aid off and don't pull out.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
basically.
Life philosophy.
Well, no, we definitely needed to pull out of Afghanistan. That we needed to do that. We didn't do it well, but eventually we would have needed to. And I think it was just inevitable. Yeah. So that's a good example of like but if I were to say, well, we can't pull out because bad things might happen, it's like, well, they're going to happen no matter what. It's better that we just do it right now or do it in a responsible way and then move on and figure out how to work with it. It's not just if we just keep doing the same thing over and over no matter what, and nothing is ever going to get better, we're just going to stay where we are. Some things might not get worse, but we're never going to progress as a society.
I agree. Well, I think my little joke went over your head with the whole "don't pull out and take the condom off" joke.
Oh no,
That's fine.
I got it. I just didn't want people to think that I didn't think that we should have pulled out of Afghanistan. So
Okay, yeah.
Clear. All right.
Last thing though,
go ahead.
does anybody have any question for me in the chat? Because there's probably people shit talking me the whole time.
No, I think
anybody want to shoot something?
I think it was more of a. I think there were a couple times where you were saying some shit where we were like, "What?" But I think we eventually, once we sort of like went through the weeds, we figured it out. Because I think that is actually a lot of issues when people say shit that like right away you're like, "I'm sorry, what was that?" But then like you ask them a few questions and then you kind of realize that, oh, they don't actually think that. It just kind of you just didn't articulate it well. I think we were having a couple problems with that earlier. Like, again, with, like, socially enforced expectations, enforcement. But I think after we kind of weeded through about all the stuff, I think we kind of came to a good thing. We both agree that even despite our own values, what we think people should do, we both agree that we shouldn't try to force people or try to, like, pressure them or shame them into doing certain things. We should just try to make a society that allows people to do as they want, to do what they want and make the right choices by way of information and knowledge and just a desire to do what is best and to pick the best option for them that'll make them the happiest, that will help those around them the best, and that will hurt the least amount of people around them as well. And I think that is something
future,
that we should,
something to look out for is how, I think we said it already, how you're defining something and how another person is.
Oh, crap. I closed out the window. Sorry, you still there? Oh, shit. Fuck. I'm an idiot. You still there? Sorry about that. Yeah, I sometimes I like mindlessly close out windows and I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's to your point. That is why at the beginning we really tried to set what exactly it is, and it was difficult, and it took us a while, and we kind of went off on a tangent. because you kind of were just saying social enforcement in general, and then we kind of brought it back. But I think eventually we got to a point where we got to a nice middle ground equilibrium. So I think this all...
You took some of the I had, I took some of the you had, and mixed it up, and
I think
the results were...
Yeah, I think in the end we eventually came to... I think it was a productive discussion overall. I think we both agree that we want to form a society where we don't really pressure or make people fear doing certain things. We want to give them the information to... We want to give them as much information as possible so they can make informed decisions, plus encourage them to make the decisions that are best for them. And I think if we do that, we are going to see society improve no matter what. Whether in 100 years we end up with a completely everyone's monogamous or everyone's polygamous, I think as long as we sort of nurture a society that is all about people doing what is best for themselves and those around them, no matter what that entails, that will lead to a good society. I think sometimes people just get stuck on the way to go about it as opposed to just being flexible on it.
And that making a decision that isn't that isn't often related, say, or conflated with being a good decision doesn't necessarily mean that the person has bad intentions or will do self-destructive things. That's person-to-person basis, but that seems to be how you like to express it, that doing something doesn't mean that they're doing all these other things.
Exactly.
And society's like, you're doing this thing, so that must mean you're doing all these other things and you're this kind of person.
Exactly. And trying to get rid of those those sort of like stereotypes and those extrapolations, I think will, just because someone is living in a poor neighborhood with like a child out of wedlock doesn't mean that person necessarily made bad choices. Maybe they did. Maybe they're not a good person, but it doesn't automatically mean they are. And I think the farther we get away from those sort of stereotyping and those sort of presuppositions, I think we will end up good.
Yeah.
I have to wrap up, but man, But yeah, no, I think this was productive. I think we ended up getting to a good place.
I'm glad it did not end terribly.
No, not at all. It did get a little heated there, but we eventually found our way out, as opposed to
That's the fun of it.
Yeah, as opposed to whatever his face was last time. That just kind of went downhill.
Yeah, I tried my best to recognize when it was going that direction. Yeah. And be like, okay, this is happening, so let's...
Yeah, we dug ourselves out of it, which was good.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Very good.
All right. Thank you so much, man. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, we'll talk again sometime, maybe.
Maybe. Let's see. You have a good one.
No,
Take care.
Man. Thank you.
Beat this boss. God.
I'll do what I want. No, I'll eventually beat him. But I'll see you.
Yeah.
All right. I got to run, guys. I got to get dinner. Thank you for joining. Yeah, so the fourth diversity video, unfortunately, is shelved for now. However, the Wire video, season 5, the ultimate critique on it is going to be coming out in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned for that.